I am podcast.
I am podcast.
I am Spartacus. I mean podcast.
I am podcast.
I am podcast.
I thought you might say podcastus or something. That was my only question.
Well, it could have been the name of the miniseries.
I want you to.
Yeah.
I want you to say. I also podcast in the way that Tony Curtis says. I also juggle.
I also podcast.
I juggle as well.
I juggle.
Whatever he says. It's so good.
I feel like that's weirdly become this movie's lasting legacy is just impressions
Clueless.
of how much Tony Curtis sounds like he's
It's just
ordering
like-
a sandwich at a deli every single line of this movie.
Which way to the G train?
I
just think that 1 second moment in Clueless where they're watching it.
Uh-huh.
You're not as big a Clueless head
No,
as me.
I like Clueless. Every time I watch it, and I'll maybe watch it every couple of years, I wait for it to hit me the way it hits you. And it still has yet to. But there are other movies that take a while.
I used to be able to recite that movie
I
from
can
memory.
recite that.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
And of course, Christian brings over Spartacus.
Yep.
Which is some like it hot and Spartacus is what she
Yep.
says.
Yep.
Yeah, he brings over some Tony Curtis movies.
Christian
loves Tony
is the closeted
Yes.
guy she's crushing on.
And
yeah.
they watch
Who plays him
and
again?
I don't know that guy ever like really amounted to
He's
much.
one of those 90s
No,
guys where
he
you're
didn't.
like, he seems like he's going to be a star.
Yeah, he didn't. I don't know where he went.
I mean, God,
But
like,
the Spartacus
Dan
joke.
is saying to him, "You think Sammy Davis Jr.'s death left an opening in the Rat Pack?"
Yeah,
he's
that's-
got the hat.
Yeah, that's so good.
Such a brutal own.
I have a 45 and a shovel. Yeah.
Nobody would miss you. I
It's so good.
can really quote the entirety of. We watched Clueless
We should
together
just
many
do
years ago.
Hacker
Do you remember
Land.
that?
I think that's right. We did. Yeah.
I came over to your apartment on 13th Street. Remember when you lived in Park Slope?
Years ago.
Yes.
Yeah, that's
when
right.
I was like a baby.
Was Beckett in town? Is that your?
Yes,
Was
Becca
it?
was
Yeah,
in town.
okay.
You were nursing David, right?
Yeah,
While watching
yeah,
Clueless?
yeah.
I was a true like baby. I had just moved to New York.
Yeah. I think you were like. Did you even have an apartment then?
I think I didn't. I think I was still living like I was
Yeah.
crashing on a couch.
Because you stayed at our place once, I believe.
Did I? Maybe I
so.
did. Yeah,
I think
yeah.
so.
I mean, wait. What's
Vagabond
Christian's?
Sims.
Justin Walker is the name of that
Right.
guy, and he just never really. It was his first movie, but he never really.
Wow.
It was so surreal seeing the actual scene because I'd never seen Spartacus before,
Yeah, me neither.
but I'd seen that one little clip from Clueless like
Read
hundreds
to
of
the
times,
children,
Yeah.
Yes.
and it really does stand out in the movie.
Well, because you are like, holy shit! Like,
Who
this
is
guy has such a face, Tony Curtis. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, he's so pretty.
yeah.
He was a pretty guy.
There's that story. I mean, Tony Curtis, I believe, would tell this himself.
Tony Curtis would tell stories about himself.
Let
Show
me
his
tell you a
stories.
story. Uh,
I mean, he's a big star at this point, or not
Yeah.
a big. Yeah, he's a pretty big.
While
star
I
at
wait for
this
the
point.
sandwich, let me.
Here
want
on
a lean
Greenpoint
cut.
Avenue, is this one of those where I have to run to get it? Like
Russian dressing.
he has a story. What's Tony Curtis's story?
What acting school was he a part of? I'm trying to. He was part of one of those legendary acting classes or acting schools or theater
Let's
groups or
see.
something.
Okay, I'm not sure. I'm not seeing that.
But
here.
he was in the group with Mathau
Mhm.
and like a couple other fucking like hangdog rumpled suit actors.
Sure.
When they were all the same age,
right.
and they would all shit on him for being
It's-
a shitty actor.
Yeah, apparently, like part of the crew, Rock Hudson,
Yeah.
Piper Laurie,
Sure.
James Best, a lot of these guys. His joke is, "I was 1,000,001 shot. I wasn't the low man on the totem pole. I was under the totem pole in a sewer."
I don't
his
get the
joke.
respect.
Yeah, I don't know why he's Dangerfield all of a sudden.
It was Mathau and someone else I'm forgetting would really pick on him
Sure.
and just be like, "You can't fucking act. You can't fucking act. You're never gonna make it. You can't act."
Do you think Mathau's negging him because he's like Tony Curtis is like 40 times prettier than him?
This is the thing.
Right.
So then, like 4 months later, Tony Curtis is like starring in movies.
Sure.
And Tony Curtis was like, "The first thing I did when I became a picture star, I bought a fancy car. I put a woman in the passenger seat, and I drove by, and I went, 'Hey, fuck you, Mathau.'" I rolled down the windows.
And that gave way to Grumpy Old Men. That
Right,
Was,
he
that
was
was the
like,
inspiration.
Mathau was just jealous because he couldn't get pussy. But the incredible thing about that story is just to think that Mathau is sitting there and he's like, "No, I'm going to will myself into being one of the leading men of a generation." That Mathau didn't just become like some
I'll
fucking
show
schmo.
him. Yeah, no, you're right.
That Matthew became like an action star and a comedy star and a drama star and won Oscars and was a box office draw into his 80s.
Yeah, Method probably has him beat, but they're both pretty big.
Yeah.
But Tony never got an Oscar.
But
He only
and
got
Curtis's
nomination.
run was a lot shorter.
Never
I
had
feel
it
It was
like.
shorter.
Yeah.
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 And he also had the weird dual thing of like being the gay icon that he kind of always like
But
pushed
also
that away,
being like a,
but
"Hey,
also
no,
then
I love
embraced
ladies,
it. Yeah,
guys.
yeah.
Like,
It
come
was a
on."
weird.
Wasn't he one of the people who like was really vocal against Brokeback Mountain? He's like,
Yes.
it's disgraceful. John Wayne would be rolling in his grave. And they were like, Tony, what's your best picture pick? Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. I remember that distinctly.
Really?
In the same year.
Those kids went to the prom. It was great.
They were like,
Cedric Diggory.
Yeah.
I mourn his loss.
for some reason, that's the funniest one for him to like. But just the idea that he was shitting on Brokeback so much, and they were like, so what are you going to say, Capote? Are you a crash guy? And he was like, I'd give it to that Potter kid 5 times the charm.
But that's really funny.
It was like a Liz Smith interview, and he was like, love that Potter kid. Radcliffe is really growing into a fine young actor.
I mean, my favorite thing. Did you watch the Potter reunion thing? And I know this is just a huge.
Emmy nominated.
I did, sadly.
I watched it, and I had just rewatched all the movies because it was like whichever fucking strain it was, Omicron 1 or whatever.
I did the same, yeah.
And Goblet is one of my favorite of those books, and always been one of my least favorite of the movies because they kind of
It's
just
so
squeeze
bad.
it in, and
Yeah.
you're like, this one's not that good.
Newell's a bad
and it's
fit.
Mike Newell. And then in that documentary, you're like, now Goblet, and you're like, well, they'll just skim past this one, right? And everyone's like, Mike Newell had the energy of a guy on cocaine who had just stole their car.
Yeah.
And like you see these tech clips of him where he's like charging at the actor. He's like, ah! And you're like, this is not what I expected.
Goblet has that insane concert sequence where is
it's
it
got the
Jarvis
big-
Cocker?
Yes. And it's got the Jarvis Cocker is part of the Weird Sisters. It's at the prom at the
Right.
They're at the
Yule
prom.
ball,
And they do the World Cup.
and they do the World
But
Cup, and
it's
they do the
it's a
tournament.
sequence of like what would a wizard rock concert be
Yes.
like that has the subtlety of like the B-52s playing the BC-52s and the Flintstones.
Right.
Anyway, it just is really funny that like Radcliffe, they're just cutting to all these talking heads where they're like, yeah, Mike was really intense, and
Yeah.
he's fucking Mike Newell. You would think he's the sleepiest guy.
It's
He's
so
just
bizarre.
like whispering instructions to Jim Broadbent on like the set of whatever Tony British movie he's making. Right? That's
Sure.
what I imagine from Mike
Yeah.
Newell. Anyway.
I think that's the worst one, but it weirdly just like it has the lasting legacy of like that's the first Voldemort. And fucking and Pattinson. It's Pattinson and Fiennes kind of keep that movie relevant.
This, to go back to Tony Curtis, this picture is not as important as we make it. It's nothing unique. The only thing unique about it is they put it on the screen and they make them gay cowboys. Howard Hughes
Okay.
Sure.
and John Wayne wouldn't like it. I don't think we should be guessing what Howard Hughes would or would not like.
Also, by the way, the list of things Howard Hughes didn't like, very long. Notoriously,
And
a
then-
picky man.
Germs.
When asked,
Hated them.
when asked to name his favorite film of the year, Curtis replied, Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. So
Thank you. I will never forget that.
Why would you? What a thing.
Right, because it was just so many people, so many actors of that generation were saying that same shitty stuff about Brokeback, but he was the only one to counter with Harry Potter.
Yeah, Ernest Borgnine didn't come up with anything. I know that. Yeah.
I just like, why do they bring up John Wayne? Like, John Wayne wouldn't like a lot of shit right now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
Most
you bring
shit.
John Wayne would
like in
hate TikTok.
2006, and you'd be like, here's what's, what do you think of Transformers 2, John Wayne?
It would drive,
Is this working for you?
drive him insane.
Curtis, what is the sort of Curtis run? I guess I didn't realize, and it didn't really come out until after he died, that he was just completely fucking dubbed in Some Like It Hot.
Is he?
There was always the thing of like, oh, some of
He's
it.
talking like that.
No, well, for the when he's in drag,
Oh.
that he couldn't do it.
Oh, he
And I
would
think
do
they'd always
the
said
high
like, oh,
voice.
some of
Well,
it's done,
he
and
did
then
it-
after he died, they were just like,
He did a Cameron Diaz thing where he did a patois, like a Caribbean, and they were like, "Oh, actually, that
want to
doesn't
sound
work."
like Rihanna.
Yeah, I'm gonna fuck this car.
Let me fuck this car.
So he comes to Hollywood in the late 40s, like
Yeah.
we said, and he was a Universal guy,
Sure.
and they taught him how to, whatever,
Mhm.
act. He's a Bronx kid, right?
But he was one of those guys where it's just like, this guy's so fucking pretty, he doesn't even matter.
So right,
Just put him on
so
screen.
good looking, and he
Yeah.
does like he did a Douglas Sirk movie.
Mhm.
He did Houdini with Janet Leigh, who he was
Right.
married to,
Right.
playing Harry Houdini.
Yes.
And then
Let me get out of this jacket real quick.
Oh no, my appendix.
I
That's
feel
too
like
much water.
one of his
Let me
first
outta here.
one of his first huge hits, weirdly, is that movie Trapeze with Burt Lancaster, which I've never
This
seen.
jacket ain't straight.
Keep doing it, guys. Right,
Let
so
me
he
be
does
right back. Gotta walk this rope real quickly. I'm on a trapeze.
right. He does that, and then the next year reunites with Lancaster to do Sweet Smells, etc., which
Sure.
is probably his
His
best
best.
movie and his
Yeah.
best performance.
Yes.
And is such an incredible movie, but is obviously a box office failure because
Right.
it's too dark. But it gets good reviews.
Some Like It Hot's the other one that sort of solidifies him in film history, even though it turns out half the performance isn't him.
Well, but then it's Defiant Ones the
Oh,
year after
oh,
that.
sure,
That's his
sure.
Oscar nomination.
Right.
Right. That I believe is his only Oscar nomination. Which is a little rude, but whatever.
Sure.
And then Some Like It Hot the
Yeah.
year after that,
Uh-huh.
which he's great in. He talks
is.
like this.
The shell shell stuff is really good. I'm
When I was,
I'm
like,
not discredit for him. I
Nine,
just was,
and I saw that movie for the
Oh,
first
yeah.
time, and he held up the shell. I was like, "This is a good bit."
I know
That's fucking
that's
funny.
one of those things where we went. I was a little kid. I was maybe younger than that, 8. And my parents were like, we went over to someone's place for dinner and they were boring. And my parents were like, you kids like sit in the room, watch a movie. And we were like, what movie? And they looked through and it was like the only movie they had on VHS they thought would appeal to us in any way was Some Like It Hot. And I was like, I don't want to watch this boring fucking movie.
That is exactly. My mom was like, "We're
Yeah.
going to the National Film Theater, and we're going to see it in
Yeah.
Britain, in London,
Yeah.
of all places."
Yeah.
And I was like, "This movie's like black and white." I'm like 9 years old. I was like, "This is going to be boring." And she's like, "You're going to like it. I trust."
It
trust
also
me."
has the 80s action comedy thing where like the opening 5 minutes or 10 minutes are like straight. And I'm
Right.
just like, this is just some gangster movie. This is not my kind
Yeah.
of thing. And my mom
Right.
was like, it's going to be funny. I swear to God. And then the moment the jokes kick in, I was like, you're fucking right. This thing plays.
What year was that?
50. That's 59, right?
That's 59. So
okay.
Spartacus is the year after?
Then Spartacus,
Uh-huh.
which of course, this movie we're talking about today was the biggest hit
Yes.
of 1960. It was
Yeah.
a gigantic hit.
Huge hit.
And then The Outsider. We're getting in trouble here. It's immediately, it's like movies I don't really know that
So
well.
it's like a 10-year run.
Captain Newman,
Yeah.
Paris When It Sizzles. Like,
He was also one of those guys who sort of aged weirdly. Like his face made sense at a very specific age range.
Yeah.
And then when he's like got wrinkles on his face, but he's still got those eyelashes.
I mean, he looked weird
Yeah.
later in life. He had work done too. I
Very
think.
weird. No, but
Yeah.
I'm saying even before the
Yeah,
work
no, I know what you
done,
mean.
he was a guy who was so boyish
We
that the
should-
second he got older, it didn't really click.
We
Right,
have to
right,
acknowledge
yeah.
in '68 he takes out his own money or like takes a giant pay cut or whatever to do the Boston Strangler.
Oh, sure.
And that was seen as a comeback at the time. It was like, oh, this is like a dark movie.
Yeah.
But it didn't really pay off. Like
Yeah.
it doesn't lead to like another huge
Right.
run for him. And then he just becomes fucking, kind of this.
It's just like
you
he'd
know,
go
like
on
a
Larry
guy.
King. Like he would just
Yeah,
be
exactly.
like a guy who'd tell good old Hollywood stories.
Yeah,
Like even Kirk Douglas, I feel like acted more post-stroke than Tony Curtis did the last 20 years of his life.
Yeah.
Right? Douglas at least did like
Yeah.
3 or 4 movies post-stroke.
I was trying to think about like what I would have seen Kirk Douglas in when I was like growing up because like I know he was acting like in the 80s
Oh, you mean
and
like what you
90s.
would have seen
Right, like what's the first
contemporarily.
thing? Because it wouldn't have been in one of his older movies.
Right. There's
It-
that movie Greedy with
Yeah.
Michael J. Fox.
Oh, sure. That might have been it.
Right.
Honestly.
Greedy, that's 94. Well, of course he's Chester Lampwick in that Simpsons episode.
right.
That's probably all of our first.
Yeah.
Wait, really?
The rocket, hit the rocket
Whoa.
car,
Yeah.
and
Solid gold.
like a great performance.
Yeah, that's like a classic Simpsons episode.
solid gold.
That's a great
In my
performance.
rocket car. It is a great performance.
Simpsons did have that period of time where
Those
it was
early
like
days.
well, incredible. But also that thing where it's like where Feige's at now with Marvel, where he's like, who are the actors who would never fucking do a superhero movie, and
Right.
can I get them in this just to prove that we're undeniable?
Right.
Where Simpsons would be like, we'll get people out of retirement.
We'll get
Well-
Elizabeth Taylor to say one word.
Right.
Yeah,
Like,
like what is it?
was just
Kathleen
incredible.
Turner as the
As Malibu Stacy
the-
creator.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the Malibu. They used to get them, and then they would give them actual
Real
roles,
performances.
and it was really good. Like
Yeah.
they would
And
have
if
like
that
a-
was now on television and they were filmed,
Yeah.
it like everyone would be like, "That's the best performance of the year." But it was like a little
Right.
one-off on The Simpsons.
on
Right.
The Simpsons
you know.
on a
Well, and the
Sunday
Kirk
night,
Douglas
yeah.
performance is similarly like incredible.
Yeah.
It's like they would write incredible characters for these people. I did the Talking Simpsons podcast, which is a good podcast I recommend. But I did that a year or two ago, and somewhere deep in the pandemic, and the episode I picked is this one with Michael Keaton from like season 13, so it's like after the glory days, and it's not a particularly good episode.
Total disaster times, right?
Well, but it was also like Keaton and fallow period, and my whole defense of the episode, because I tried to watch every fucking Simpsons during the pandemic, and I think I got up to 24, 25 before I tapped out. Was like, this might be the last time they hire a star and have them play a character rather than do a character that is a caricature of the celebrity.
Michael Keaton, what are you doing here? Well, Lisa,
or they'll be like, it's Keuchel Meaton, and he's like, yes, I'm a banker.
Right.
Like they'll have Ricky Gervais play someone who isn't Ricky Gervais, but he'll look like Ricky Gervais, and he'll do the Ricky Gervais routine.
Right.
It becomes Larry Burns.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, but was the turning point? Was that the Alec Baldwin Kim Basinger episode where they like moved to Springfield? That episode's weird.
That episode
might
is funny, but it is kind of, and it's also weird how that episode was my first impression of Alec Baldwin.
Yes,
and I was like, so Alec Baldwin's like a really skinny, cool guy, right? Because
Sure,
that's what he looks like in this.
He's in The Getaway.
You're like Hollywood's greatest couple.
Right, everyone loves these two, and Ron Howard is like a drunk, fun guy. Like
that episode, like frames them like even in that moment they were seen as Tom Hanks and Rita Wilson rather than these two hotties married each other.
Right.
They're like, well, of course, the pillars of the industry.
Right, like a romance that will last the test of time.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Spartacus.
Spartacus.
Kirk Douglas.
Yeah.
But what else
He's what, 82 in this movie? Judging by the looks of it.
What was the...
Forky was like, did they do something to his chin? I'm like, no, his chin just looks like that. It's like someone just put a thumbtack in it.
It's also one of those things. I was looking at his Wikipedia, and they have like I think like a high school or college photo of him.
Yeah.
And you're like, his face is frightening when he's young.
Oh, I can imagine.
It's like he needed like 6 lines to come into play.
Oh my god, he looks like the Joker,
right?
Oh,
I mean, also, those old photos are very smooth.
But his nose is like the penguin.
Isn't that the guy from Deep Space Nine?
It looks like Odom.
Yeah. He sleeps in a bucket.
But it's like he's way too smooth, and then in this, it's like once he gets a little bit of like sandblasting in there.
When I was doing theater in college, there was one guy who, he was good looking enough, but he looked old, and basically every acting teacher was like, just wait until you're like 40 and you'll start working, and he's starting to work
right
now.
It's like happening, right?
Right. You need to sort of grow into. I may think John Hamm is another guy like that, where when you see like 25-year-old John Hamm, you're like, this doesn't really make sense.
He just kind of looks like a lot of guys back then. Like, it's just.
But it was like, you're going to be such a good man. And Kirk Douglas was one of those things where like he had to become like a man.
Yeah.
He had to have like an earned grimace, and then his face completely made sense on screen, but looks unreal. You're right. It's one of those things where you look at him and you're like, that must be the result of some bizarre surgery.
Right.
Like certain early golden Hollywood stars where you're like, they had a very bizarre nose job that looks like no one else's nose, but it's iconic.
Well, it's like when you look at like photos from World War II or something, and you're just like, everyone's face is not what faces are now. Like, and he has one of those. I wouldn't even call him handsome by like today's standards, but like I'm sure he was kind of viewed that way, right? He was
100%.
Yeah,
but he's striking. He's one of those classic people you call
Right.
striking, which means that he looks like he could hit you over the head with a baseball bat or something.
But also like his head is like 50% of his height.
Yes.
Yeah.
Everything is like at an angle. He's got like all these insane angles to his chin.
He looks like hieroglyphics. Like he looks like.
Have you ever seen Lust for Life?
Yeah.
Yes.
Where he like, and it's like, I feel like he was primarily cast because he kind of looked like Van Gogh.
Yeah. I gotta paint some flowers.
You think? Sorry, you were saying
He like looks so much like Van Gogh.
Yes. They do
a
good.
Yeah.
Well, the hair looks so good in that movie. Like they make his hair all like stringy and spiky.
Yeah.
I love him as an actor. I know Kirk Douglas was probably sort of bad person, right?
Seems
like it's one of those
yeah.
like it's decades lost now. But
look,
I mean,
at the very least, he was intensely complicated. There are some real positive things you can point to in sort of his life and his advocacy things, and there are a lot of horrible whispers about him that you can Google. But certainly he was a very unique screen presence,
and like those, like The Bad and the Beautiful is one of my favorite, Minnelli movies. I love that movie.
He's also one of those guys who, at that level of stardom, actually used his stardom in pretty fucking interesting
ways. Well, that's
ways.
what's interesting about him in general. We're going to talk about it. We talked about it last week.
He so easily could have just been Heston.
100%. And like, you know, Ace in the Hole is like, that was a big early movie for me as a teen where I'm like, I didn't know movies were this dark. Like,
I mean, the fact that he
incredible.
played a depressive Van Gogh,
Yes.
Played Van
like
Gogh
in this
what?
like movie that's like, there's no
56.
action in this. It's just
Right.
this, you know, is fascinating.
Minelli
He
as
did
well.
Cuckoo's Nest on Broadway.
Yes, and
Yeah.
his son fired him. That's
Right, he bought
for
the
movie.
rights.
Yeah.
Right.
Um,
That's
Had
right.
Michael produce it, and Michael was
Yeah.
like, "You can't fucking do
But
it."
he's one of those classic like cases of like, he had a great career, obviously, and he was in a lot of great movies. But like when New Hollywood comes around, he actually struggles to adapt. Like, and he
didn't fit.
right but like whereas he actually had been kind of the cutting edge guy in the 50s doing the darker stuff,
Right.
and then when Hollywood is catching up to it, he doesn't catch up.
He was
And he's instead doing like
Yeah.
that mob movie, The Brotherhood,
right.
that everyone cites as like, oh, this is like the Godfather but bad. Like this
Right,
is
right.
like before they figured out that you should cast Italian people and like, you know,
Right.
have a real sense of verisimilitude. Like, you know, it's just like not as good.
He was sort of like, I mean, the model of what becomes like sort of DiCaprio, Cooper,
Yeah.
the guys who are really handsome and get the movie star breakthrough and are like, I'm going to use this to elevate cinema, hire unconventional people,
Right.
get weird material adapted rather than just play the hits. Because even something like Spartacus, I mean, even when he would do these big epics, the things that physically he seems like such a good fit for, he would often approach them in kind of a weird way. His acting style was just so rooted in that time. And I think even Heston was able to make a shift to grizzled,
Yeah.
even if it went
Yeah.
a little bit into self-parody. And Heston was also smart about the fucking sci-fi shift.
He was. Heston did trash, like good trash.
He
And that was
picked
smart
good
of him.
trash.
Kirk Douglas is a better actor than
Yeah.
Charlton Heston, but Heston has, you know, screen presence.
But they're interesting guys to compare.
They are,
Because
and of
Douglas
course,
was arguably a better actor.
well, and also, and you probably know this, like Douglas was the runner-up for
Yes.
Ben-Hur.
And this movie is kind of...
Yeah.
This
Them
is
drafting off of
Kirk
Ben-Hur.
Douglas's Darkman. He's like, I'll fucking wear leather.
Right, I'll do it myself. I'll put
Yeah.
some sandals on. You wait.
Yeah.
But like, it's just funny that this is the biggest movie of the year.
Mhm.
It's a huge hit.
Doesn't get picture, director, or star.
Which, like, what is that?
That's weird.
Do we know why that is? I mean, maybe there's something in the research, but like, he never won an Oscar in general, which
Yeah.
is wild. 3 nominations, never won. But like this movie did not get a Best Picture nomination, but the really famously bad. I can give you the
Is that
You
the
know.
Gigi year? No.
No,
No.
it's not. It's the
It's a
it's a good year
Yeah.
because it's The Apartment wins.
right.
But
Right.
The Alamo, which is
Yes,
this famous
that's
bomb,
that's the one that's weird to get in there.
where John Wayne played you know, Davy Crockett,
Yeah.
and like, but like everyone knew it as this kind of like crappy vanity project
Yeah.
that didn't really work.
No one
Like,
remembers
that
it.
sneaks in. Because that's the one John Wayne directed.
Right.
And that sneaks into picture, and then it's Elmer Gantry,
Yeah.
which I guess was like a big movie at the time.
The
Sons
Jack
and-
Cardiff movie?
Yeah, Sons and
Daughters.
Lovers, which I've never
Sons
seen.
and Lovers, sorry.
And then the Sundowners, this like, you know, Robert Mitchum, Deborah
Yeah.
Hart. Like, I don't know. Maybe Spartacus was like almost seen as too like
Poppy.
trashy,
I
like
think
poppy.
so.
Yeah.
But then
like-
the Alamo thing is the thing that's confusing. If the fifth slot was something that was similarly arty, I would get it more. It's also, this is the year that Psycho gets snubbed for Best Picture. It gets
Yes.
director and
it
supporting
gets
actress.
director and supporting actress. Yes. And
It's a wild year. I mean, the rudest thing.
Mm.
Do you know that the Golden Globes did give this a Best Actor nomination, but
Yes.
for Olivier? They nominated
Oh,
Olivier in lead.
That's funny.
they did.
I mean, he's really good.
he is really good, but it did not, and it won the Golden Globe for Best Picture.
Right.
So that's also weird.
They nominated Woody Strode for supporting actor, which is, look, an incredibly striking, effective performance, but very small.
Woody Strode is probably not who I would nominate.
Who was he playing?
He's Draba. He's the
He's the
the
one
friend.
who fights.
The former athlete.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
Yes, who gets killed. Yeah.
And then Ustinov wins Best Actor at the Oscars. for
Best
this.
supporting actor.
Yeah.
Supporting, sorry.
Peter
That's a
Ustinov.
good win.
I think that is a pretty deserved win, especially when you look at the competition.
It's an awesome win.
Yeah.
What's the only thing that's interesting about it is when you watch this movie, I don't know if you come away like in a total vacuum, and I'm like, do you know who won the Oscar of that cast?
No.
I'm not
I would probably
sure-
say Lawton over him.
Yeah, you would probably say Lawton or Olivier,
Yeah.
and like, but then when you know that, you're like, well, no, Ustinov is really good. He comes around at the end.
That's the thing.
And it's kind of like such a great button on the movie.
Yeah.
and he's changed and he plays it well. Like, you know,
You
he's
certainly-
really good.
When the movie starts, you certainly don't think that guy's going to be in the final scene of this movie.
No,
And then
he
there he is.
disappears for truly an hour and a half, maybe.
Yeah.
Like he's in like the first hour and the last half hour.
And he has that great scene with Lawton where they're just
Yes.
kind of talking about their like philosophies for life that doesn't need to be in the movie at all, but it's just so,
I've talked
well
about this
done.
before, I think, but Ustinov, like one of the all-time great raconteurs. Like almost no one was better at telling showbiz stories than Peter Ustinov. And the thing that was incredible about it is when he would tell these stories, he would do immaculate impressions of every guy. And there's some YouTube video of a long-form video of him telling stories about the set of this film.
Sure.
Because you just go like putting a fucking Olivier Lawton, you know,
Yeah.
the fucking Ustinov, like just the dinner table conversations must have been fucking incredible. And he tells all the stories about working on this movie. And when he does it, he not only perfectly impersonates Charles Lawton's voice, but he transforms his
He
face.
like does the right. He
He
like
does- and
sinks
it's like-
his face.
It's like Jim
That's
Carrey,
cool.
where
I
like
watched
the
that.
bone structure of his face changes, and it's unbelievable. And it's clear it's just like such a party trick that he's so proud he can whip out at any point.
He's one of those guys that doesn't exist anymore. Like an actor who is just like well read,
Yes.
intelligent, could go on like a talk show and smoke a cigarette. Like like a
He
real
was
like
also like kind of a comedian.
Yeah,
like he would
like-
go on a talk show and he'd clearly have prepared material.
Right.
Like he wasn't just a guy who was like charming.
Have you ever seen Top Cappy? I've never seen Top Cappy. That's what he won his other
I know.
Oscar for.
I need to see that.
Never seen it.
Because wasn't Verhoeven was going to remake Topkapi as a sequel to Thomas Crown Affair.
You're right. The
It's
Top
a
Cappy
very
affair.
weird thing. MGM was trying to 10 years later
Yeah.
sequelize
Yeah.
the Brosnan Russo Thomas Crown Affair by
Right.
taking Topkapi and giving it to Verhoeven, which sounded like such a
Brosnan
bizarre
coming back.
project. Yeah,
Brosnan's in Black Adam this year. Are you hyped?
it's Dr. Fate.
Mhm.
What's Renee Russo in? That's what I want to know.
I don't know.
Not enough.
She should be in Shazam too.
Yeah, bring her in.
Yeah. Look, this is we're talking about so many things. It's Blank Check with Griffin and David. I'm Griffin.
Jesus, we haven't introduced the podcast. I'm David.
It's a podcast about filmographies, directors who have massive success early on in their careers and are given a series of blank checks to make whatever crazy passion projects they want. Sometimes those checks clear and sometimes they bounce, baby.
Mm-hmm.
This is a mini-series on the films of Stanley Kubrick. It is called Pod's Widecast. Today we are covering Spartacus, which is what we like to call a guarantor.
Classic guarantor.
This is the film that gives them the blank check that they run off of for the rest of their career.
He made the most successful film of the year.
Yeah, it worked. And it was like he had made 4 movies that didn't connect to the box office
Essentially, yeah.
in a row. And this
They
is
had
the
gotten
one.
rising acclaim,
Yeah.
but not financial.
But not only that, he comes away from this movie and he's like, okay, that's the last time I ever bend to anyone else's whims ever again.
Yeah, because he kind of proved himself as like a studio, like reliable. You know,
Right.
Douglas brings him in after
Yeah.
firing the original Anthony Mann or whatever, and then he's like, okay, so I did that, I can do that, but I'm never going to do that ever again.
Right,
No,
right.
Yeah.
this is his
Right.
only
Yeah.
hired gun movie, arguably ever, right?
Right.
Not arguably.
Like, for hire.
Inarguably,
right.
this is his only
He directed
film.
the whole first season of Mad About You, but that's television.
But that was a
right?
passion
Yeah,
project
right?
also.
That
right.
right. Yeah, he did that. He paid out of pocket to do that.
Yeah.
Actually,
Yeah.
he funded the whole thing himself.
I felt so bad for those live studio audiences because
Yeah.
they'd come in every night and it would be one camera set up and he'd do 400 takes.
Screaming at James Burrows.
Good riser.
Thank you. No, but it is interesting because like Kubrick talks about it and he's like, this was the first and last time I did what anyone else wanted me to do. Like the first 4 movies, he's doing exactly what he fucking wants.
Pretty
the first 3 movies, he has a very limited canvas, limited resources, and he's
Yes.
learning, but he's making everything exactly how he wants to. No one is preventing him. He just is on a learning curve. Then Paths of Glory is like, I fucking arrived, but it underperforms at the box office. And then this one, he knew he kind of had to play the game a little bit, but also
Yes.
was incredibly difficult.
Yeah, he was a huge pain in the ass. Old Stan the Man.
32.
Yeah, he was a baby. That's true. I mean, the whole thing is he died young. Like that's
Yeah.
the whole. Like
Yeah.
I had the conversation that I bet you've had with friends
Mhm.
where they're like, "What are you guys doing next?" And I was like, "Kubrick," and they're like, "Are you going to break that up or something?" And I'm like, "No, it's
Yeah.
not a lot of movies."
No, it's 13 films in total.
Yeah, like it's not going to be that hard. I mean, it's going to be hard to talk about these totemic movies, but like it's not. It's pretty quick.
But people think that because it goes
And
from
they're like,
the
oh, but then-
50s to the 90s.
But he died when he was like, in his 80s, right? It's like, no, he was like
60?
67 or
Yeah.
something. Like, he was not.
It was
that old.
kind of a-
70. He was 70.
it was like a bizarre, sudden
He
surprise.
could have made more movies. Yeah.
death.
I mean,
Uh,
we're gonna I'm gonna hone my impression of Tom Cruise being asked on the Eyes Wide Shut making of, which I've seen so many times.
Yeah.
Where they're like, "What was your reaction to hearing that he had died?" And he just looks at the camera like a maniac and he goes, "Horrified." But I can't. I need to get it exact. Horrified. He says it twice.
Yeah.
So good.
There's an amazing quote from Kirk Douglas that JJ,
Well, sure.
a researcher, pulled up.
Okay.
Where not jump ahead, but I think it's
Give me the quote. Give me the quote.
That Kubrick was signed to like a 5-picture deal with Douglas's company, and this ended up being the second one.
Sure.
They were supposed to do 3 other movies after this. Kubrick really wanted to do Lolita next. He was developing it before this film. But Douglas was like, "I'll let you out of your contract." And Douglas, in some quote after Kubrick died, talking about what a pain in the ass he was like, "By the way, if I'd kept him in his contract, he only made 6 movies total after Spartacus. From 1960 to 1999, he makes 6 films. Half of his remaining filmography would have been under my contract."
Is that? No. Okay. All right.
Right? Isn't that
Yeah.
crazy?
Yeah.
Let me give you some context. Speaking of our dossier.
By the way, our guest today,
Oh, you didn't introduce our guest.
Yeah.
Richard Lawson for Vanity Fair and the
Hi.
Little Gold Men podcast.
Hi. I feel like
The
every
great Richard
time I
Lawson.
come on this podcast, we're talking about a movie where Kirk Douglas drowns someone in a cauldron of soup. Don't you feel like that's
It does.
a recurring theme for
It is
us?
where it happens in Lady in the Water.
Yeah.
It happens in Spanglish.
Yeah. I mean, it's most of Lady in the Water.
It's most of Lady
Is
in
it
the
in
Water.
Trolls?
Well,
Well,
I
it
mean,
happened
I
to
was
the
sort of-
experience. It's not in the
Yeah,
film,
yeah.
but it was offered to us in the experience.
Griffin flew off the handle at one of the employees. And-
Well, who
It's-
was Kirk Douglas?
Yeah.
Who was like, "Welcome to the experience."
It's crazy to think.
He had
Oh,
the
there.
troll thing up.
It's crazy to think that
He kind
Kirk
of has
Douglas.
troll hair.
He does.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's crazy to think that Kirk Douglas lived to 103, which on paper seems like a very full life.
But he never.
He never got to do the experience.
I
Never
know,
did it.
I know.
He
That's
didn't
the saddest
live.
thing.
He
That's why
could-
Michael
if he
Douglas
coulda
does
held
it
out-
every day in his honor. Sometimes Catherine comes. Not always.
Give me the experience.
This is your 1, 2, 3.
Can't
4,
stop the
5,
feeling.
6, 7, 8, 9, 10. This is your 11th episode.
Yeah.
Richard.
Holy shit.
Congratulations!
Thank you.
12 if you include the experience.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Rarefied air.
Did you know that your blank check Wikipedia page now includes your tweet to Katie Rich after both Kelly Reichardt and Wolfgang Peterson had lost, asking if they should do a 5-month Wolfgang Peterson Kelly Reichardt series, and you said Air First Cow.
It's pretty good.
Yeah, anyway, that's just on the Wikipedia. So
Best
there
in
you
the
go.
biz.
I'm glad.
That's
I'm-
why he's back, baby.
I'm glad that's been
Old
immortalized.
Dickie Lawson. Yeah. Ben,
What's up, Griffin?
when the weather is warm,
Yeah.
as it is right now
Right.
in New York City, our home,
Mm-hmm.
in this summer, you can't help but get out and explore.
I mean, yeah.
Even for someone like me who doesn't get out and explore, who spends the summer inside, AC cranked to the max, chilling out, you do get tired in the summer. It's more important than ever to refresh and refuel.
I agree with that.
Whether you're exploring or homebound, you need that summer energy.
Yeah, you need to refresh.
Whether you're planning for the next big summer trip or recovering from the last one, it's important to give your body the fuel it needs to feel its best. And Ben,
Yeah.
with Splendid Spoon, you can enjoy a clean, delicious, stress-free meal in just minutes. This is what they do. This is what Splendid Spoon does.
Tell me.
Okay?
Okay.
They take the work out of eating healthy by delivering ready-to-eat plant-based meals, smoothies, and juices right to your door.
Okay, because we're talking about summer. Another thing about summer is
Yeah.
it's hot.
Yes.
Why do you want to be cooking in your home? It makes it
Ovens?
hot. You
Do
know?
you know how hot
Can you imagine?
ovens are? Stovetops?
No thanks.
That's like open flame.
I don't want to do that. I want
Hot
someone
coil?
else to figure it out for me.
Absolutely. I want someone to ship me some noodles, some smoothies.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about? This is the thing, okay? Splendid Spoon meals shipped right to your door, ready to enjoy in just minutes. Fits in any schedule. And Ben,
Yeah.
there's a meal plan for everyone. Every single meal is 100% plant-based, gluten-free, and GMO-free. Poison Ivy might not like that, but I think for other people, that might sound like a good deal. You got delicious dishes like creamy mushroom and spinach noodles, coconut curry, cauliflower tikka soup. That's a personal favorite of mine. And with over 50 choices and a constantly rotating menu, there's always new dishes to try.
All right. Well, I'm convinced.
Ben, I implore you,
Yeah.
to stay well-fueled this summer with Splendid Spoon.
Okay.
And you can get started today and save on an entire week of ready-made plant-based meals. This is how you do it. Go to splendidspoon.com
Sure. Yep.
/check for $50 off your first box when you subscribe. That's $50 off at splendidspoon.com /check. And you don't need to go exploring in the summer. Just stay home.
So Kubrick makes Paths of Glory, but he doesn't make no money.
Yeah.
The movie doesn't make no money. And he's like, sure, I got my critical plaudits, but quanto dinero per stand?
Right. And he's been validated by this big major star. Put him on a bigger stage. It's like, I think this kid's got it. And the movie was well respected, but it's still,
Yeah. I mean,
no one's banging down his door.
But beyond that, I think he truly just needs moolah.
Yeah.
He just doesn't have any money.
Especially because the first three, they were essentially putting their own money
He was
into
on
a family.
spec. He doesn't make any fucking money from
into-
any of this shit.
Right.
And I think Paths of Glory, his salary was like deferred or whatever. One of those classic Hollywood things where they're like, we're going to defer your salary. It's a good idea.
It was deferred, and then the movie didn't make money. So he was truly like, I kind of haven't made $1 directing, and I'm 4 movies in.
So one thing he wants to make apparently is a Civil War drama called The Downslope that he wrote with Shelby Foote.
That Mark Forster was going to adapt into a trilogy recently?
Correct, but it never happened.
You know what's
and
always...
he wanted Gregory Peck to be in that movie. Mark Forster did, which is part of the problem.
Trying
It's going to be an issue,
he's
Mark.
dead. I don't care if he's dead. I'm wearing a big scarf.
I was
gonna
going to
say-
say he's German.
Spielberg's the only
He
person...
is German.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Spielberg's the only person who's survived trying to make an Unmade.
Right.
And at the time, he was butchered for it.
He was. It was the sort of the millstone around the neck of them.
But it almost feels like a cursed thing anytime a guy's like, I'm going to open up the archives.
Don't touch some Stanley Kubrick script because people will just compare you to it.
Right. Like Carrie
I mean,
Fukunaga.
Mark Forster maybe couldn't dare,
But Carrie Fukunaga is saying like, and now time for Napoleon.
Is that what he's doing? Well, he's
Well, this is my point. It feels like, don't open that fucking box.
AI, right?
AI is the Kubrick screenplay that Spielberg made. That's right.
But every other time
27
someone's-
Dresses was him.
That's true.
And people, but I feel like a lot of people don't know that.
Well,
He had a very different take on the material.
Oh, it was 28.
What if it,
right. They shaved one dress.
what if it was like AI and they were like, well, she really lightened it up. Annie Fletcher was like, no. My version was much darker.
Yeah, right.
I added all the dark stuff to 27
Yeah.
Dresses.
It was my idea to cast Heigl.
Marston's so good in that movie.
You know who's good in everything?
James Marston.
Other than X2. Go on.
He's all right next to though.
He's bad next to, and it
I
pains
think
me to
he's
say.
bad.
He's bad. And it pains
I
me
think
to
he's
say.
just fine.
I interviewed him during the pandemic because I was watching. He was on like 18 shows at one point.
He's done a lot of stuff.
And I was like, well, what's his deal? And so I just literally emailed his publicist and was like, can I talk to him? I just wanted to figure out what his deal is. Very nice guy. But he was like, yeah, I was in, I was living in where I grew up in like South Dakota or whatever, Kansas. And, and I finished school and I got in my car and I drove to California and I started working later that week. It was like, cool. Good for you.
He's from Oklahoma City.
That's right.
And indeed, he just drove on. Sounds like he basically just drove on to the set of The Nanny. And they were like,
"Here you
sure,
go."
you want a recurring role?
Yep.
I have often contended from my
And he
vantage
yelled at Walter
point.
Matthau. He
Yeah.
drove
Yes.
by Walter Matthau's
Yes.
house.
Yeah.
Fuck you, Matthew. I'm an Ally McBeal season 4.
So why is this guy rubbing pussy in my face? I don't even know him.
Another. Oh, no, go ahead.
No, James Marsden, in my mind, a perfect career.
I think it's a great career. I think I'm right. I'm with you though that even though I don't think he's bad in the X-Men movies, it's weird that he played a fairly iconic comic book character and no one remembers that.
No.
Or wants to talk about it.
He did it before it was a thing to do.
Yes, exactly.
When it was like, well, who's going to play fucking Cyclops? Get some
no one
Canadian
wants this
TV
shit.
actor.
Yeah,
Yeah,
just
he's
get
just some
someone with a
random
jaw.
brown-haired
Right.
guy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we just need a jaw.
Right.
Another movie Kubrick wanted to do is a movie called I Stole $16 Million.
Which is a good title.
It is a good title. Even now.
Even
I'd be
now.
interested to know about
It's
someone
still
who
a
did
lot of
that.
money.
Yeah.
He wrote it with Jim Thompson, his old collaborator, and it was about a Prohibition era safecracker.
Okay.
And it's another one of those scripts that people keep claiming they're going to revive.
This
No
is what I'm
series
saying.
or
People
movie has been made, but
love taking things off the Kubrick shelf and being like, I can make this.
Who do you think could make it? Like I mean, not that specifically, but like who could be the heir apparent to his style.
The problem is, I think anyone who could be the heir apparent to his style understands it's stupid to literally pick one of his unmade projects.
Right. I mean, people will bring up like Wes Anderson or PTA or Nolan or anyone who's famous for control,
or Todd
right?
Field or any of these people.
But it's right. It's
Fincher,
tough
even
to,
I would imagine.
Yeah, all these people.
You know, it's
right.
It's a millstone to try and beat.
None of them would fucking
Kubrick.
touch it. Like, right. I think the only reason AI works, by the way, is because they already were working on it together.
Yeah, and Spielberg actually knew Stanley Kubrick.
Right.
It's a little different from like whatever, you know, someone who's obsessed with his movies.
Right. I
You
think
know,
it's like it's a fool's errand to be like, I'm going to try to make the movie he wanted to make. And it's a fool's errand to be like, I'm just taking this material and doing my own thing with it. But material that's mostly known for being an unmade Stanley Kubrick thing.
Who's on the level as far as intensity?
Nancy Myers.
Fincher's intense but more friendly, it seems like, more personable.
Fincher seems like, I mean, like, I think it's sort of similar though with Kubrick and Fincher. Maybe not. Fincher does seem nicer just in general, but it's like everyone who loves Fincher, like they'll go to war for him.
Right.
Like, and then when you say like, doesn't he make people like take 80 takes of fucking opening a door? And they're like, that's just like good work. That's just getting good work out of it.
Right.
You know, like they're just like, it's just discipline.
And also just he runs like a really professional
Right,
set.
right,
He
right.
doesn't like fuck around. But Kubrick doesn't strike me as particularly charming.
No,
like,
I don't think
one
he was like
seems-
pleasant.
Right.
Right. Whereas Fincher's like nice. Like,
It's like a funny guy.
yeah. I mean, I interviewed him and
Who else
He
is
was
in?
really
I mean,
nice.
like Wes Anderson's very exacting, but all the actors are like,
He's nice.
it gets a little meticulous. It could be a little maddening sometimes. He like directs you by the centimeter, but he like creates a great environment. All the actors are in the same hotel and they host big dinners every night. So part of the appeal is like you go to some European country and there's like a banquet with 20 of the best like character actors in the world.
You get custom luggage, your
Right,
initials
right.
on it.
like all these other guys who are that intense
some of those pajamas, maybe with a collar. Yeah.
and
yeah,
successful. There's a notion of it being more fun. And then the guys who really sort of fashion themselves after Kubrick and the intensity are guys like Mark Romanek who end up sort of being their own worst enemy.
Right, where,
Where
it's
it's
like,
like,
why would
dude,
anyone
take
give
it down
you
a
money?
notch.
Yeah, you're taking
Right.
too long to do anything. Okay, Marlon Brando had seen The Killing and had seen Paths of Glory
Mhm.
and thought Kubrick was great. He's working on a Western called The Authentic Death of Henry Jones. And they were working on it with Peckinpah, I guess, writing it. And he wants Kubrick to direct it.
Peckinpah?
Sam Peckinpah.
It's a
Sorry.
good name.
It would be cool if his name was Peckinpah, like he was some sort of
Gregory
chicken
Peckin's
dad. Right? Yes.
David, can you read the quotes that JJ pulled up from Brando about Kubrick? Because I thought these were really good.
Sure. Just to say, yeah, right. Well, Kubrick comes aboard. Wait, the quote. Yes, I'll get. Here's the
Yeah.
quote. Stanley is unusually perceptive and delicately attuned to people. This is the quote you mean, right? He is an adroit intellect and is a creative thinker, not a repeater, not a fact gatherer. He digests what he learns, and he brings to a new project an original point of view and a reserved passion. Is that the quote?
Yeah, I thought that was
Yeah.
really fucking good.
It's just like a very precise and intelligent quote from a guy that I think now we think of as being like, I like Stanley Kubrick because he
Yeah.
seems like a real cool guy. I don't know, like, you know, now we have this cartoon version.
Don got shot in the throat. Have you been offer pilled yet, Richard?
I watched, I think, the first 2 or 3.
I mean,
So at that point, if you cut off one of your limbs, you can stop the infection from spreading.
$127.
Right.
You made the sacrifice.
But I feel like I
Swiss
keep
Army knife.
hearing people do the Matthew Good voice,
It's
and it's
so-
like, oh, I want to spend more time with that. I want
Yeah.
to watch more of it.
it's
you know?
genuinely a good
But
performance.
I love him.
everyone says he's the good performance,
Yeah.
but he's not the star, right? It's like it's Ruddy is the main character.
Yeah,
and
but I would.
he's in it a lot.
He's the second lead.
Okay.
And especially in the latter half of the season, they kind of start to pin the emotional arc on his sort of overcoming the heartbreak of Ally McGraw, and he's pretty fucking effective.
I love Matthew Good.
But it's also, it's the kind, while being the only tasteful performance in the show, it's also so over the top that it's also fun.
Who plays Brando?
Justin Chambers from Grey's Anatomy, why do you even have to
Alex Karev,
ask?
obviously.
Why
What?
would you even
When you
ask
saw
this?
Karev in season
What?
1 of
What are you
Grey's
I mean, I
talking
guess
about,
I get
Richard?
the look a little
Who
bit,
else
but
could possibly?
that's wild.
There's a scene where he comes up with the look for the Don in real time. Right, that is like David's impression of Brando right now. What if I put tissue
Okay.
paper in my cheeks right now?
I gotta watch it.
You gotta watch it.
I guess he kind of looks like Brando. Like, it's one of those things where you're like, what? And then you see pictures of him
Yeah.
and you're like, this isn't great, but it kind of looks like Brando if you put the makeup on him. I
But
don't
there's
know.
also when the Steve Jobs Ashton Kutcher movie came out, I remember someone tweeting, Ashton Kutcher is Steve Jobs, great casting, an idiot playing a genius. And it does feel like one of those things where it's like, you can't cast a guy who's an okay TV actor as Marlon
No
Brando.
offense to Justin Chambers.
No
I mean,
offense.
that's
But that
insane.
is, I mean, he was never in the top 10 of good Grey's Anatomy actors.
That's the thing. You can't just cast that part on look.
What if he's listening?
He's a big blinky.
Sorry, Karev.
Sorry.
He's a house hawk.
I didn't say shit. All
That's
right.
true, you did.
Yeah, you love Chambers, and you've watched The Offer, right? Clips. The
I've
Offer.
watched clips and I love your work.
I showed Ben clips and he said, I feel like I'm hallucinating.
Marlon and Kubrick start working on this movie. Brando and Kubrick. They fire Sam Peckinpah because Kubrick wants to rewrite the movie, which was maybe a mistake. And everything starts getting crazy. Once over the summer of this is their right. Kubrick and Brando are writing together. Over the summer, they're working at Brando's house. Brando required that anyone entering the house take off their shoes to not damage his teak floors. Kubrick took off his pants as well and would work in a dress shirt and underwear. Sort of a weird look.
Yup.
But very Brando-y look.
Yeah.
Brando would sit in a lotus position on the floor and strike a gong with a leather mallet if he thought discussions were getting off track, which maybe we should introduce to Blank Check.
You guys are sitting in your underwear, so you might as well.
Yeah.
In
And
lotus-
dress shirts.
Yeah. And we're not wearing shoes.
And this would apparently cause dishes to rattle in Brando's kitchen. So that's the vibe that's going on. What do you guys think?
I mean, it sounds like season 2 of The Offer.
That's what I'm saying. This sounds like
Yeah.
something out of a TV show.
Yeah.
And then Kubrick gets the rights to Lolita, which he wants to make, as you
Right.
said. Like
He's fucking crazy about it from the word go. Like the second this book comes out, he wants to make it.
And so they're obsessed with that. This movie, of course, is One-Eyed Jack's the movie that Brando
Yes.
is working on. Eventually, people start leaving because it's getting really annoying. At a certain point, Kubrick says he doesn't know what the film is about, so he quits. Brando reaches out to Elia Kazan, then Sidney Lumet, and then decides to direct it himself. Have you ever seen One-Eyed Jack's? I've never
No,
seen
I know
it.
people love it. I mean, it's bizarre.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
But for like a 1961 movie, I think it's like interesting. You
Sure.
know, like-
What makes
and
it bizarre?
It's like a weird like comic western that's got Brando in it. I don't know. I've never
it's like
seen
got
it.
an odd tone.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. For the material. It's sort of gonzo.
But the moral of this story is Stanley Kubrick just wasted 2 more years hanging out with Brando, banging a gong, and he comes out of it with like, maybe I want to adapt this unadaptable book,
Right.
and I'm not making that movie.
And he's still under a Douglas contract, but Douglas has no interest in making Lolita,
No.
even producing it. I mean, he's sort of in the territory of potentially becoming Mark Romanek now, where it's like, is this little precious director man who can't get anything off the ground, is too difficult, is too exacting. He does say that, like, when Brando decided to direct it himself, he felt like that was a real mitzvah, because if he had successfully hired someone like Kazan or Lumet or whatever, it
Right.
would have looked like, well, Kubrick couldn't cut it.
Right.
And
And
by-
instead it's like, no, Brando's crazy.
Brando's just crazy. He wants to do his own thing. It's like he lost 2 years of his life, but it didn't damage his reputation.
That's fair. On the other side of things, Kirk Douglas is working on stuff. He starts working on a Spartacus movie, and then there's a race because Yul Brynner is also working on a Spartacus movie called The Gladiators, and they're in a race of like who can get this movie going first.
It's 2 different books adapted.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
And so, wait, what's that I hear? What's that I hear? Tick, 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 splash, 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 splash. That's the sound of a typewriter in the bathtub, Griffin.
Oh,
Oh,
Because
Lord.
who
Here it
does Kirk
comes.
Douglas hire to write this movie in 2 weeks?
I am the one who types in the bathtub.
Dalton Trumbo himself. Did you know Dalton Trumbo wrote this movie, Ben?
Oh, I saw the name and I thought tub fucker.
Tub fucker. To be fair, not name one forgets.
Dalton
yeah.
Trumbo.
Dalton Trumbo.
No, it's a good name. It's
but
a
this
great
is
name.
this is one of the things that gives Douglas a good reputation. That script that ages well.
Yes.
He was
is that
super
he
against the blacklist.
ended the
stuff
blacklist
and,
essentially.
He hires a blacklisted writer. He gives him the name of Sam Jackson after his future favorite
Well,
actor.
they were going to do Charlton Dumbo, but they were like, I think people might figure that
the
out.
studio sniffs
Sounds
it
like
out
a
because they sniff it out because all the screenplay pages are covered in bathwater.
Who the hell is Bryan Cranston?
And he churns out a script so fast, which good for him, especially a fucking long ass like historically sourced script like this or
It's
whatever.
like also, like the Nathan's hot dog eating contest where they dip the hot dogs in the water so they drown faster.
Right, he's got the
If you're in
water
the
all around
bathtub,
him.
The
Right.
fingers
Yeah.
are lubricated.
Yeah,
You
that's
type
right.
real fast.
He's like
sliding all over that fucking thing.
And so they decide the Gladiators are supposed to shoot in Europe.
Mhm.
Douglas decides to shoot it in Los Angeles,
Mhm.
which is easier. And so he gets the rights to Spartacus being made, essentially. The other movie dies.
Right. They do a thing too where like Variety, who was the other studio that was doing the Yul Brynner one?
I think it's UA, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They announced like we are going ahead with the Gladiators starring Yul Brynner, a budget of $5.5 million.
Correct.
And then Kirk Douglas bought out an ad Variety, and he was like, Universal is doing Spartacus at a budget of $5.5 plus $1.
Right. $5,502,000
Okay.
is how he put it. Exactly.
Classy.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Anthony Mann, as you mentioned, Richard is hired to direct the film. Saul Bass is brought on to do the titles.
Those titles are incredible.
And Saul
Incredible
Bass
titles.
also is actively involved in pre-production on the Anthony
look.
Mann version and is helping design the look, is doing location scouting,
He
is setting up a
goes
lot of
to
the
Death
aesthetics.
Valley.
Right.
This is him
Right.
looking at Death Valley.
Right.
He's got his hands over.
But they
it.
ended up in
Interesting.
Spain for some of it, right?
They did.
Yeah.
That comes later. Yes.
Because
But
when
it's Kubrick who insists on Spain, I believe.
right when Kubrick takes over at that point, the big battle sequence was supposed to be more what's the word I'm looking for?
I don't know.
Suggested rather than a full-on epic thing.
Sure. You don't
'Cause,
really see the battle.
Right, and it
Although
was
they
like
cut a
sort
lot
of
of it.
abstract. And
Right.
he was like, we have fucking Kirk Douglas with a sword. You need to have him ride a horse, and you need to have people go into battle and whatever. And Universal said you couldn't afford it. And so he was like, what is the cheapest possible country where I can get the most people? And so then the argument, we're skipping ahead here, was that like,
You're
I'll do
skipping
all the
ahead.
exterior stuff in Spain, I'll do all the interior stuff in Hollywood.
But at first, they're in Death Valley. They're
Yeah.
shooting this with Anthony Mann. Douglas hates Anthony Mann. Says he's letting Peter Ustinov take control of the production.
A weird, I mean,
I don't know.
it sounded like they shot it chronologically because Anthony
They're doing
Mann,
at least the Gladiator.
But those
school stuff.
tensions between actors was apparently like the kind of animating force of the whole production,
Look
right?
at the
Like,
fucking above the title on this movie, and
Yeah.
you're just like the amount of ego that must have been thrown around at every possible moment. And then this young director who's just like, I want the entire world to bend to my whims. I'm dealing with like 6 guys who all
Right.
want to be the loudest voice in the room. But Anthony Mann essentially directed the first 10 minutes of this film.
Or yes, a good chunk of those early Gladiator scenes.
Certainly,
yes.
like I think the very opening.
It's
Yeah.
2 weeks of work.
Yeah.
It's something. They fire him. Supposedly Kubrick had always been Douglas's first choice or whatever.
Uh-huh.
Who knows? Calls him. He's at a poker game. And he's told, you have 24 hours, report to the studio, you'll be directing. Like, it's like Saturday, and it's like, you'll
Yeah.
start on Monday.
Yeah.
And Stanley Kubrick did it because he wanted money
Money.
and because he wanted to start moving out of this contract he had with
Yes.
Kirk Douglas.
Right.
Yeah. And he's like 32 years old. And so he's showing up to this gigantic production looking like a baby.
Yeah.
And I think the whole crew is like, who is this fucking twerp? Like, he has to deal with that,
Yes.
Um,
Especially because he's already
Tony Curtis
carrying
says that
himself like
they
he's
all
Stanley
screwed him
Kubrick.
around. Right. Yeah. He's
Right.
not a big bossy guy.
Tony Curtis was the only one he seemingly got along well with, and Tony Curtis had that bizarre quote where he's like, we got along because we were only interested in talking about 2 things. How pictures are made and our dicks.
Maybe they love talking about their dicks.
Yeah. I didn't realize Stanley Kubrick was David Sims.
Look, as always,
Uh-huh.
who does Stanley Kubrick fight with the most? The fucking cinematographer.
Yeah.
It's always this,
Yeah.
it's always some old, in these early films he makes, some old grizzled film cinematographer who's like, you can't tell me what to do. And Stanley Kubrick's like, if you don't change that lens to a long lens, I will assassinate you immediately.
There's that
Like,
story. Can you read verbatim the story with the DP kicking the light? Do you know the one I'm talking about? It's in here. As you're looking for this, I am somewhat surprised that Kubrick never went like full Soderbergh and just shot the movies himself.
Right.
Especially because he had a photography background.
Yeah.
And you assume that if he wanted to become an A-level cinematographer, he could have taken the time.
And he essentially won a cinematography Oscar for this, but couldn't
Right.
accept it because it was in the other guy's name.
Right. Like, why wasn't he operating the camera himself? It just feels like it would have saved him a lot of...
it probably would have. I'm sure union rules were one reason,
Sure.
right?
Oh,
but
yeah, sure.
you know, the light story is in one of my favorite scenes in the movie when Herbert Lom, playing the merchant guy, comes to meet with Spartacus. I really love that scene.
Yeah.
You know,
Oh yeah, that is a good scene.
where they make the deal, and then he's like, "You're gonna lose," and Spartacus, you know, like I just love that scene. But they're talking about that scene, and you know, at a certain point, you know, Kubrick's fucking with things. He goes over to Russ Meddy and he says, "I can't see the actors' faces," and Russ Meddy, his face turns purple. He's fuming in his little chair, so angry. And he lifts up his foot and gives one of the lights a kick, and it just falls, or I guess it like skids into the scene.
Yeah.
Like he like kicks a light on set,
Yes.
right? And then it rolls in, and he looks at Kubrick and he says, "Now is there enough light?" And Kubrick looks at it and looks back at him and he says, "Now there's too much light," which is great.
Yeah. It's pretty funny.
But I mean, like Curtis says, like we were only interested in our dicks and how a picture was being shot.
Yeah.
I guess he's saying like we were in our 30s.
Sure.
So it's like we were boys around town.
I just feel like
or maybe they were specifically interested in their dicks and only that.
I'm interested in both interpretations.
Sure.
I could imagine Stanley Kubrick very clinically talking about his own
Girthy,
penis and what fascinated him
Not too
about
long.
it. Right.
Bends, you know, whatever. Right. And Curtis is like, no kidding. We're both from the Bronx. You know, we got real Bronx dicks.
Even
Honest dicks. Come on.
yeah, no, yeah,
Hard work.
Yeah.
Yeah, not these Hollywood
Countless-
dicks,
yeah.
you know, with, you know, all
These ain't
kinds
dicks
of...
that haven't worked a day in their lives. These dicks got city miles on them.
My grandfather's dick was a longshoreman.
I know. I was just
I
gonna
want my
say,
son's dick to be the first dick that goes to college.
Kubrick's been married 3 times already at this point, or is out of his second marriage at this
Yeah,
point.
sure. I mean, it's some of those marriages are those like, you know, they
Right,
got married
yes.
so they could be roommates type things.
Right.
But yeah, he's on his third marriage. Yes,
He obviously
his final
right
marriage.
third marriage at 32. He obviously liked women. I still just imagine the way Tony Curtis talks about going out in the town and cruising is very different than the way
It doesn't
Stanley
seem like a
Kubrick
natural
talked
combo.
about.
It's
Yeah.
Ryan Gosling and Steve Carell, and that's what is that movie?
Yeah.
It's Crazy,
Crazy
Stupid Love.
Stupid
you
Love.
should be wearing a
Yeah.
32.
Yeah.
And Olivier is the classic big boss,
Sure.
where he's basically directing the actors himself, like
Yeah.
in any scene that he's in.
And was Gene Simmons famous for Kiss already?
Oh my goodness.
Richard.
Why did I invite you on this August miniseries?
And she wanted to do it in the full makeup, right?
Yeah,
So-
she did. She asked, and they said no. And she's like, "Well, I could be the Star Child.
if
I
you
could
look
be
in the back in some
spaceman."
scenes, she's going, ah.
The Catman.
What are
Yeah.
you talking about?
Thinking the tongue-
I mean, she had
listeners,
been.
Richard stuff.
I feel like her biggest movie is Guys and Dolls.
She's won the Oscar already at this point.
And she had. Had she won the Oscar?
She won Best Actress for Guys and Dolls.
No, she
No,
did
am I
not.
wrong?
She did win a Golden Globe,
Okay.
but not Best Actress at the Oscars. I think her only Oscar nomination is for Hamlet, which she's in with Mr. Laurence Olivier before this, and then she gets
Okay.
another one for the happy ending. I don't think she ever won an Oscar. No,
But yeah, you have. I mean,
no. Yeah.
Night of the Hunter has already been made. Lawton's already
that's true.
directed and has directed a lot of theater.
Mhm.
Olivier obviously has directed a Best Picture winner.
100%. He's
Kirk
a big director.
Douglas is the producer on this movie.
Yep.
Is the guy getting this made.
And then it sounds like Ustinov is throwing his fucking weight around too. Like, you know,
Right.
even he's no. Yeah.
This movie has like 5 potential directors on it. Or at least 5
yes.
people comporting themselves as such.
And you're having scenes like there's this Norman Lloyd who had worked with Kubrick before, like describes the scene where like Lawton's doing some speech and Olivier's like, no, you should do it like this. And Lawton's like, well, what do you mean? And then Olivier just like sits in his chair and is like, here's how I would do it, and acts the scene. They're just all doing it themselves because they're all these big shots.
Those guys, that generation, I feel like was incredibly competitive.
It's true. And
It's thrilling to watch Olivier and Lawton like do their kind of trod the boards sort of old soul theater shit, and then Tony Curtis and the guy who
John Gavin as Caesar.
No, the other guy who plays the one who loses initially, Dahl, something.
John Dahl.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like he sounds kind of just like 1950s American guy. Like it's just like a really funny mix of styles. And I mean, obviously Kirk Douglas is on the Tony Curtis side of things, but he kind of blends it
a little. I mean, he's so theatrical.
Yeah,
it works though that the slaves all have like Americanish accents.
Yeah,
and then when we're in the Senate, it's all these British like.
It's just wild
like,
seeing Tony Curtis in a bathtub with Laurence Olivier, and it's like. And like them talking at each other, and they could not be more different. In terms
they
of
are the one, and they're the ones who cross over the most of the two sides.
Yes.
Like they have the most scenes. Yeah. It's true.
Ustinov weirdly, to me, feels like the most modern performance.
I fully agree. It feels like Oliver Reed in Gladiator. It feels or like Watto.
It's kind of.
He does a very Watto-esque performance.
He does. The opening chunk, the opening hour, I was like, and this is not a criticism. I was sort of astounded that it worked and it didn't break the reality of the movie. But it's like, it feels like he's giving a performance out of History of the World Part 1.
No, I know what you mean. Yeah.
He's a lot
more
lighter on his
He's
feet.
kind of camping it up a little bit in that early part.
Hamming it up.
Yeah.
And then the surprising thing, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
The surprising thing is in the last half hour when he's able to bring like a real pathos to it.
That's
in a way
when
that
he
feels...
fucking brings the hammer down, and you're like, okay, I get why this was a remembered performance.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas like Olivier is so fun to watch, but you're like, yeah, sure, he can do this shit anytime.
But that's why it's like the fact that Ustinov is able to be like the hammiest and the most grounded of all of them is kind of astounding. Yeah.
I do love Olivier though, because he can just literally say a word like here. And he just says the word, and it sounds like a sentence, and you're like,
isn't there some story about? Is it Lawton and Olivier
Larry
dragging out a scene that's not in the movie, but they had 3 lines of dialogue, like call, response, call.
Right.
And they dragged it out for like 20 minutes because they were trying to one up each other. I think I read that.
This is that competition shit. Like I feel like these guys, if you put 2 of them in a movie, it would be like a power game. Right. And if you put 4 of them in a movie, it would be calamitous.
Yeah.
It's surprising that this movie didn't become Cleopatra.
It is, especially given that it brings in a new director in the middle, basically, of production, and has so much pressure on him,
and that its budget more than doubled, its schedule went way over.
It cost $12 million, which is like the equivalent of $110 million now, which obviously movies cost more than that now, but that is not the kind of budget you see on these movies, apart from something like Cleopatra, which cost like a fortune upon fortune.
But was a disaster and nearly tanked the entire studio.
And also Cleopatra is one of those movies where it's not like The Gray Man, no offense, which we were just discussing, where we're like, how did this cost $200 million? Like, Cleopatra, you're like, I can see how this was the most expensive thing ever made.
No. You watch
they're basically dragging pyramids around.
Cleopatra feels impossible. Like, you watch it today and you're just like, I don't understand how any of this was constructed. I don't understand how they got this many bodies. Like, I
feel this way about this sometimes, too. These sets are really good.
There are some shots in this when they're either in a battle, but really just kind of like migrating south or wherever they're going, where you're like, that's so many people, and that's not CGI, obviously. Like the scope feels impressive.
There's some matte painting stuff, obviously. There's lots of that, but the crowds are huge.
There's sort of nothing more impressive than just like a wide shot that is full.
Yeah.
Right. Where you're just like, oh, you're not faking that there's that much in frame right now. You think about like the fucking end battle of Endgame and the big lineup of everybody.
Right.
And you know that most of them were on set at the same time for that part at least.
Right.
And you're just like, if that was not shot in a green screen space, if they had shot that in a random field rather than in like a void, that shot would be so much more impressive.
It'd be very cool.
Because when you get to the battlefield in this and you're just like, God, look how many fucking people
But
there
Thanos
are.
isn't in Spartacus, so that's a count against
God,
Spartacus.
can you imagine
true.
Thanos and fucking Lawton trying to one-up each other?
Rome is on its last legs. Thanos is like building some spear. I don't know.
But you know, Charles Lawton did enter the Speed Force later in his career.
Yeah, and it was a big cheer moment for us.
But
all.
have you ever seen the photo
Of him entering the
when
Speed Force?
Yeah. No, I mean it's just a blur. I mean, of
It's actually just someone dropped a camera. But that's, later they said, like, well, Charles Lawton entered the Speed Force.
someone made up the weirdest lie about just a accidental photo. But he put numbers by all the extras who were playing dead bodies.
Yes.
Right.
And he would call out like, "Hey, 76, like be more dead," or whatever.
Right, you're being dead the wrong way.
And then they would take all the numbers away and then shoot it. Like, but it's just like you see the photo and it's like there's over
I don't
100
know.
people just lying on a hill, like waiting to figure it out.
It sounds exhausting to even be told that. Like that just that thought process exhausts me.
I mean,
Just thinking about how that would have worked.
I saw this on Wikipedia, but cited to a Kubrick book.
What?
So I think this is a verifiable source. That Universal was like, you know, he's joining this movie a couple weeks in, right? He's a fucking young buck filmmaker who hasn't made a hit yet. And they're like, so just so you know, in terms of just like workflow, we'd like there to be like 30 camera setups a day. And Kubrick was like, okay, I'm going to give you 2.
Yes, and they compromised on 8, I believe.
Yeah,
yes.
but that's insane. To go from 32 to 2,
Right.
and that they landed closer to his
Much
ask.
closer.
Yeah. Is just wild.
How long did it take to shoot?
a couple days. Spartacus.
Yeah.
Let's see.
But it is the thing, you look at big sequences like that, you're just like, how long does it fucking take to reset this?
Right now.
The act alone of putting all those numbers out
Yes.
and then taking them away
Right.
again.
And there's fucking horses and shit.
There are horses.
Those
yeah.
flaming barrel. What are
the-
those
the
weird
logs or whatever?
logs,
Yeah,
the fire logs?
Those seem effective. Yeah, I wouldn't
So-
want one of
so
those
obviously,
coming at me.
so much of this movie is like Ridley Scott went yoink yoink yoink. Like I'm taking all this,
Oh, it's
like
so,
like
it's
way more than I
huge.
realized when I
Oh,
was
had
watching.
you had
know,
never seen this?
I'd
movie.
never seen
I
this
had never
before.
seen it.
Yeah, you guys
Yeah.
never.
Really, I'm like, this is really the main thing the Gladiators are riffing on.
Oh,
Yes,
hugely.
100%. The
But it's like,
first half is.
Why are there no flaming rolling logs? That was
Yeah.
the coolest. One of the coolest
Gladiator
things.
has tigers, chariots.
Yeah.
You guys aren't impressed?
Look,
love
I
Gladiator.
feel like I'm gonna say this now. I've always had a hard time with Gladiator, and I had a bit of a hard time with this movie. And I wonder if there's just some block there.
Yeah, you
Where
don't
in-
like swords
in
and
both
sandals.
cases, I watch it and I'm like, this is very impressive, well crafted. I can't believe you got this much. You know, you put all these elements there on the day. I find the story is a little hard to crack into. It did make me appreciate Gladiator a little bit more.
Gladiator
I think
fucking
like I
rules.
understand why Gladiator became such a big hit, that it found sort of more emotional ends. There's the
Yeah.
line that Kubrick had about this movie where he was just like, my fundamental regret of the movie is the central character who I never fucking figured out. He's got
hates
no flaws and no
Spartacus,
quirks.
right? Because he's like Spartacus is just this like absolutely
Yeah,
divine
he hated
figure.
the I Am Spartacus stuff, you
Right.
know. But then I
Which
think
I think the I Am Spartacus works, but that line
it's
really,
so much more subtle than I thought it would be because
Absolutely.
I'd seen the clips and I
And
was like,
shorter.
oh, it's going to be this big rousing. Oh, it's short, exactly.
It's
and
short.
and
you,
it
you
gives way
imagine
to
you're
a much
watching an
more important
excerpt of a
scene.
much.
It's true. It's also
Yeah.
not the last moment in
No.
the movie, which it could be. Like you don't really need 20 extra minutes.
No.
Like I mean, I like the end of this movie a lot, but like it could
Yeah.
just be like, and then no one gave Spartacus up,
And they all marched off to
and
their
they all
deaths.
fucking died.
Yeah.
Right? You know.
Yeah.
But
Um,
I read through the dossier before I watched the
Okay.
movie.
Brag.
It's not a brag. I'm saying it was a mistake because then when I landed on that quote of Spartacus has no flaw, no
Right.
flaws and no quirks, that was ringing in my head the entire movie.
Mhm.
Where I was like,
But, like,
he fucking nailed him.
I disagree with Stan the Man. I love this movie. This movie's great. But because like Spartacus is just supposed to, he represents the collective. Like that's what this movie is about. Like what is frightening to the Roman Empire or the
Mhm.
Roman Republic is that like they are bonded, these men.
Sure.
Like, you know, this and all of the people, the underclass.
and perversely by their own doing, you know, it's
Right.
the Romans' fault that
Right.
all of these people from disparate places have now formed this thing.
And I love that old bathtub boy, you know, Dalton himself, who even though they call him like you know, whatever, a cocktail communist or right? They'd be
Sure.
like, he wasn't even that fucking lefty, sure, he was on the blacklist,
Yeah.
but he's like, sure, you want me to make a movie about this? Like, it'll be about like the rot of slavery and like how it like eats away
Look,
at institutions and things like
I
that.
respect this movie. I
don't have
like,
to respect
get it. I just,
You can Dangerfield this movie.
No, I'll give it some respect. I'll give it some respect. If this movie asks
I'm gonna
me,
ladybugs this movie. I don't know what that means, but I'll figure it out.
You'll go back to school with
I'm
it.
just gonna put a wig on, I think.
you want to meet Wally Sparks this movie?
Oh wow, I forgot about that movie.
It took a second. I had to dig through the bottom of my bag to find that one. But there's I think just certain things. Gladiator also. I think you're right. I think the sword and sandals thing has never really connected with me. I think the Heston movies of this era have just a little more bombast to them, which breaks through for me.
Do you like those? You like Ben
Like,
Hur?
I understand that this movie is better.
Ben Hur's pretty fun.
But even like
Yeah.
10 Commandments, which isn't a great movie, but is very compelling.
10 Commandments is also bananas.
That's
it
the
has
thing.
magic in it.
I like.
That's kind of
I
cool.
think, and Heston is so fucking over the top in these
Brenner's
things.
really fun.
Yeah,
Wait, what were you
And
gonna
he's
say,
really
Rich?
doing that with the Red Sea. Like he
Right,
yeah,
Right,
Right.
they got him.
they
I mean,
did
it
it for
wasn't
real.
the-
They shot everything for
Yeah.
real.
Right.
Have you guys seen? There was a tweet that went around, I don't know, a couple weeks ago at this point, of like someone being like, "Man, TV in the '80s really took its time," or is it No Hurry? And it's like the opening minutes of an episode of Magnum PI, and it's like it's just him getting out of his car,
Yeah.
taking his shoes off, walking down the beach, like nothing happens, and you're like, obviously now it would be.
Right.
Like you'd be right in the action. And watching this, I'm like, okay, so you go to the theater, you're like, this is this big, expensive Hollywood epic action,
Yeah.
swords, all that
Yeah.
stuff. And then there are these long scenes with two old British
Yeah.
fruits
Right, being like,
talking
what
about
will
like
become of Rome?
Yeah.
yeah, right.
And it still was the most successful movie of the year.
I know. Was
I know.
like
And, like, it's
popcorn shit.
fascinating.
Like even
Like-
for the Oscars to sort of be like, oh, it's not best picture material.
But I think like back then it was like, we're going to the goddamn pictures. We're going
Right.
to sit in a gorgeous movie house and we're
Yeah.
going to see like a thing with an intermission that's got like
and an
so
overture and an
much in it.
entr'acte
Yeah.
and yeah.
And it's
It
loaded
is-
with stars.
But
like,
it is
you know,
why
thespians.
Cleopatra was like the end of an era because
Yes,
it was
where it's
just
like, all
like
right,
it was the moment of escalation of just years and years of being like, if you pick a name from history that everyone knows,
Yeah.
you load every fucking star and heavyweight actor into it, you throw all the fucking money at the screen,
Right.
you essentially take over a country to film it for
Yeah.
4 years, it will work. And Cleopatra was the moment where it felt like the bottom fell out on
It's
that.
always like,
Cleopatra cost 3 times as much as this movie.
That's
to
It
give you an
cost 35.
$31 million.
Yeah,
which would
But
be
you do
yeah,
watch it
300.
and you're like, I don't know if any movie
It's on the screen.
looks more expensive than this in history.
Right.
But I feel like when I was growing up, like cartoons, like Animaniacs, or but also not cartoons. Like
Well,
regular
Animaniacs
things.
cost 3
So,
times as much as
right.
Cleopatra.
Obviously.
Because
And
they
they
had
did it all
actually
for real.
and
make those Animaniacs.
they lived in that tower.
Yeah.
There was always a gag if they were on a studio lot.
Yes.
There'd be in the background like a Roman soldier
of
walking
course.
by,
Right.
and I never really. I was like, "What? Like, is that a movie thing?" You know,
Yeah.
I didn't.
But,
So
like-
it's just so interesting to look at that. Like, oh no, there was an era when
I mean,
this was so ubiquitous.
They were like the biggest fucking things.
one
and
of
it
my
was-
favorite Hollywood movies ever, I'm safe saying this now that I've seen it so many times, is Hail Caesar, which is mocking that, like, kind
Yes.
of the self-important, like, well, we're making a fucking picture here
Right.
about issues where people are going to give big speeches about, like, you know, God and death and life and all that.
And
Like
I mean,
the silly self-importance of it.
there are so many big examples of this, and even the ones that were sort of like mocked and been forgotten by time, where you're like, oh, there was a movie where that guy played that character, played that historical figure. Most of them did well.
Often. It's what people wanted, I guess.
Yeah.
But like you said, and then the pendulum was always going to swing the other way. Then it's like, why aren't we making short, punchy movies? Like, you know, it's always going to,
Right.
you do too much of one, you're going to, yeah. Here's some other stuff.
Mhm.
Kirk Douglas and Stanley Kubrick are not getting along. They got along in the last movie, but I think Kirk Douglas is under immense pressure with this movie. It's so big budget, and he's putting all that pressure on Kubrick. They're fighting all the time.
I think the other difference was like Paths of Glory. Maybe he's like, I like you.
Yeah,
I
and
want to
it's
be in a movie that you're making.
and
And
it's a
this one,
cheap
Douglas
movie.
is like, you're working for me. I
Yeah.
hired you.
Yeah.
And Kubrick comes in and is like, no, I'm making this a Stanley Kubrick movie.
At one point, they're told to sit together, to take a session together with
Yeah.
Kirk Douglas's psychiatrist, so that Kubrick could better understand Kirk Douglas. The psychiatrist tells Kubrick to read Traumnovelle or Dream Story, the Arthur Schnitzler book that he's going to turn into Eyes Wide Shut 30 plus years later, which Kirk Douglas called the lousiest picture. Rude.
Yep.
he was like 100 million years old by that point, right? He was 100 years old for like 30 years in my head, Kirk Douglas.
Yeah, also in Kirk Douglas's defense, he didn't live long enough to see Jurassic World Dominion.
That's true. That's true. He missed it.
The true lousiest picture.
Kubrick and Douglas both liked the silent film technique of playing music on set to set the tone for the actors.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently Woody
So Gene
Strode,
Simmons would perform when she wasn't shooting.
right? She wanted to rock and roll
Do
you all
Strutter.
night.
Yeah.
Do you like Kiss?
No.
Yeah,
I
didn't
like
think
Kiss.
so. I know. No, I know. Oh,
Right,
I know,
Arp and
I
I-
know you like Kiss.
Are you into Kiss because of the merch?
You know what? Honestly, Ben, probably was the gateway for me.
Yeah.
I'd walk into comic book stores and I'd be like, "What's this band doing here?"
What was that? What was that movie in the late '90s about the kids who were obsessed with Kiss?
Detroit Rock City.
Detroit Rock City, and the kid from Jungle to Jungle was in it, which is
Right.
why I wanted
Sam
to see
Huntington.
You wanted to get in that
God,
jungle.
Richard,
Yeah.
he makes so much sense as
And
an
I
early
also
Lawson
juggle.
crush.
I like that replacements cover of
Yeah.
Black Diamond.
I made an impassioned plea to I put forward my thesis that the Fast and Furious movies are the Kiss of film.
Sure. Okay. Where you're like, this is probably poisonous in some way, but it's also very well executed and like
And there's like a weird earnestness and attention
Right.
to detail that like overcomes everything else.
it's sort of like also right, super macho but weirdly family friendly and nerdy. Like,
right,
yeah.
right. And he was like, no, the difference is that like Kiss fans still get mocked for liking Kiss. Like it's not cool to like Kiss.
Yeah, right.
And I'm like, the Fast and Furious movies are like the most popular movies in the world, and yet they're still like the punching bag.
They're still a bit of a punching bag.
Right.
Before we move on from Kiss, I just want to share this thing. It's one of my favorite things on the internet of all time. It is audio of Paul Stanley doing kind of crowd work between songs where it's like just his vocal track
Yeah.
isolated. And it is some of the most insane stage banter and just crazy shit that you have ever heard in your entire life.
Okay.
I highly recommend
Okay,
it.
I'll check it out.
We'll link to it on the feed.
Yeah. Ben,
What's up, Griff?
once again,
Yeah.
it is my privilege, my pleasure to let the listener know that this episode is brought to you by Mubi.
Our friends at Mubi.
We love it when an episode is brought to you by our friends at Mubi. Now, Ben, often when we have a Mubi sponsorship, David and I pull up our little browser windows and we go through and we pick some movie. Oh, here are some things that are on Mubi right now that we recommend.
I know this one, and then
Yeah.
you go off on some tangent. And you
Yeah.
talk all about the person's work, or
Here's my-
David's like
here's my
referencing
question.
a deep cut
Yeah.
stuff.
Who
Like
cares?
I don't know about.
Enough of that.
Yeah.
Here's my question.
Tell me.
Ben,
Yeah.
what looks good to you on
Well,
Mubi right now?
There's a few different things that are showing up here as
Tell
far
me.
as like films that are available. But I think I'm seeing some interesting titles.
Okay.
But the one that really stands out to me, and I'm sorry, I'm waiting for it to come back up on the
Well, this
slider.
is doing it. I'll just say this episode is brought to you by Mubi, a curated
Yeah.
streaming service, so
Ah,
showing
here we go.
exceptional
I got
films
it.
from around the globe.
It's Scenes with Beans.
Every day, Mubi premieres a new film from iconic directors to emerging auteurs. There is always something new to discover.
An extraterrestrial arrives on a planet inhabited by beans and observes their daily lives, including a traffic accident, farming, a football match, and the launch of a spaceship.
With Mubi, each and every film is hand-selected. It's like your own personal film festival, streaming anytime, anywhere.
So Movie says in our take, because, they curate these movies. That's
Yeah.
what's part of great about
Hand-selected.
this service.
Hand
Yeah.
select.
They say our take in this ingenious stop-motion short, humble beings come alive, populating their own planet made from everyday household objects. That's fun.
Okay, this sounds pretty damn good. I'll also say, Mubi doesn't just curate films for a streaming service. That's not all they do. Don't limit them. Don't put them in that box. Mubi also makes podcasts, Ben. And Mubi's acclaimed audio documentary series, the Mubi Podcast, returns this summer. This very summer that you're currently living in, if you're listening to this episode the week it comes out,
Right.
for its second season. This time the focus is on movie theaters. Ever heard of them?
I have, yeah.
They rule. They're my favorite place in the world. Because in a time when too many cinemas are shutting down, Mubi thinks it's time to lift them up. It's titled Only in Theaters, and the new season will tell surprising stories of individual movie theaters that had a huge impact on film history, and in some cases, history in general. Here's an example. Ready?
I'm ready.
The cautionary tale of the Majestic Theater, the last purpose-built cinema left on the island of Zanzibar. Now, I don't know what that means, but it sure is intriguing.
I mean, sure. I want to know more.
Well, then you should listen to the Mubi podcast, Ben.
Okay.
It's got featured guests like Barbette Schroeder, Peter Strickland, one of your favorite filmmakers.
Right.
Mary Herron, Nick Broomfield, Jodorowsky, Amy Nicholson, friend of the show, past and future guests. Last year's season 1 of the show was named Best Arts or Entertainment Podcast in the LA Press Club's National Arts and Endowment Journalism Awards. Okay, so listen to the Movie Podcast, but also, as always, you can try Mubi for free for 30 days at Mubi.com/check. And you can watch Night of the Beans. What's it called?
Scenes with Beans.
Sounds good.
You actually really have 2 days left, so it's leaving soon. But
Okay.
I urge our listeners, check it out.
That's mubi.com/check for a whole month of great cinema for free. A hiccup there at the end.
Scenes with Beans.
Scenes with Beans.
I really like this story about Woody Strode, who we mentioned,
Yes.
who's really good in the movie.
Is like captivating in
You're
this film.
genuinely like, oh no, I don't want to. I wanted
Right.
more of him.
It's one of the. It's a thing where it almost feels like watching Gladiator. Ridley Scott was like, "What if we keep him alive the whole movie?"
Right.
Like,
What if
so-
we have that
we can give
character?
him
Jean-Michel
trident in
Hunter
the net or
character,
whatever, but
right?
yeah.
Like, goes a long way in that film.
And obviously, Woody Strode, if people don't know, like had been one of the first black football players in the NFL.
Yeah.
And like then, transitions to acting. And so Alexander Singer puts it as he was this man of innate dignity, right?
Yeah.
So you just put the camera on and you're already getting something.
He's one of those guys who just it was honesty on screen.
And so in that but he was like, but he wasn't someone that you would like traditionally direct, where you're saying like, is this what I'm going to do? I'm going to kill my friend. Like, so
Right.
instead, apparently Stanley would just play music, and he says, I'll never forget the power of the music. What happened to Strode's face as the music played, you could watch his face as it was happening. The music was a Prokofiev concerto, a haunting passage.
Yeah.
It was filled with infinite longing, a kind of love story, and the effect on Strode was visible.
Was this for his final
I
close-up?
think
Presumably,
must be,
It
right?
must have
Like,
been.
which is such a good, and
I
he
mean,
does get that Globe nomination, or
he
maybe
looks-
a win. No, just
No.
a nomination. Yeah.
He looks fucking incredible in this movie. It is one of those things, even from that opening scene where Spartacus tries to introduce himself and he's like, I don't meet people. I'm going to have to kill you later. You're just like, let's spend more time with this guy.
Yeah, it's
I was so
interesting.
excited when they get into the ring, and then it's kind of a bummer when he dies.
Right.
Well, and also when he throws the trident into the crowds, and it's like, or into the stands, and it's like that's literally in Gladiator.
Yes.
Except Russell
Right.
Crowe does it, and it's like, come on,
Yeah.
Ridley.
I
like,
understand the
yeah.
real story here, but just like, I was just like, I want to watch this guy. This is the
Yeah.
guy I want to follow.
oh, fully, yeah, because he also
Um,
like it feels like more leader. Like I don't know, it feels like we,
Yeah.
in a short time, we're like, no, that guy could do this. You
Yes.
know?
His last movie ever was Quick and the Dead.
Is that right?
We recently covered him. He had
We
a
sure
very
did.
long career.
He did have a long career. He's in lots of things. Last Voyage. He's in Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, which is a great
He
movie.
gets credited
a
as
lot of John Wayne movies.
being the namesake for the character in Toy Story. I think Pixar
Is
has
that
admitted
funny, huh?
because he was the cowboy Woody of his time.
There you go.
Yeah.
I just rewatched 4. It's really good.
Thank you.
Love that movie.
Good movie. Boss Baby's been Toy Story gets one of the
Toy
few
Story
things that will
filled.
keep her eyes on screen.
Well, those bath toys too. Those are like her bath toys.
You know, I'll say this. I was talking to my friend Derek, who I similarly bought a bunch of Toy Story toys for his daughter when she was born. And those are her favorite movies. And I was like, did I successfully indoctrinate by placing these characters in the home so that when you put it on the TV, the Boss Baby is recognizing, like, oh, the bathtub friend.
Right.
Anyway, back to
Um,
Spartacus.
And I think that's why she loves her Jessie. She's got a Jessie. She
Hey.
plays with that a lot.
Hey.
Yeah. Anyway, as you say, Kubrick doesn't like the movie.
All right.
He says it had everything but a good story. He says it feels like it was written in a bathtub. I don't know why he said that. It's a weird quote from him.
Soggy
soaking wet.
pages.
Hey, why is my script so wet?
Trumbo's script only alluded to the final battle,
Right.
And Kubrick was like, we need a fucking battle scene, like,
Right.
which is funny because you almost think Kubrick might be the guy who's like, oh, that's interesting, and instead Kubrick's like, I'm making an epic over here. Let me have some guys running at
It
each
speaks
other.
to him knowing that he needed a hit. That he's
Yeah.
just like, people are gonna I'll never get hired again if this movie doesn't show a battle.
So Saul Bass helps with that sequence that you guys are kind of talking about, where it's like you see these squares, right? These geometric
Yeah.
Roman legions that are like charging as like units, and then the slaves are like a much less, regimented force, and they're like throwing fire at them, and like the contrast is so striking, like
Yeah.
visually. And Saul Bass apparently was huge on that. He wanted to have that like dichotomy between like the soulless Romans and the like soulful slave army.
That's a Saul-Bass, king of shapes.
So silly to just line up like that to fight to the death.
I just... God.
They were really good at it, though. I mean, they kind of like conquered the known world. I don't know if you know about
I
this.
just always...
The Romans are... Yeah, I'm aware.
I just always think I'd walk
They're
up
real
to the
hard
front
asses,
lines.
those guys.
I think of like the Wet Hot American Summer scene where they just go like, this feels trite. Let's just not do this.
Yeah, right.
Where they
Right.
give up the baseball game.
Right.
Like I would march to
Yeah.
the front lines and
Be
go
like,
how's about we both just
Yeah.
fucking take off and enjoy our
Yeah.
afternoon? Rather than rolling some flaming logs at you. What were you going to say?
Oh, I
Richard?
was just going to say that I was reading about the guy that Olivier is playing, the real guy, and shortly after these events, he died in like the worst Roman defeat ever, and because he made his troops get in a square, and it was the wrong strategy to take.
Should have done a
Apparently.
fucking Pentagon.
Yeah.
He messed up.
Yeah.
he's
And that's why
Crassus.
the Pentagon is shaped that way, by the way.
Yeah.
They knew.
They knew.
If you're
learned their
up close,
lesson.
it's all people. There's not really a building.
Yeah, it's not. There's no walls.
Human walls.
Yeah.
No, Crassus is interesting because he was like that's who Olivier plays. He was
Yeah.
like the richest man alive in Rome when he lived. And you're like, oh, you're like, oh, that's interesting. Why was he the richest man alive? And you look it up and it's like real estate speculation. And you're like, fucking like 3,000 years ago, it's the same
Right.
shit.
He's fucking Trump. Yeah.
He was like,
is.
oh, buy this.
Yeah.
It is
It's
like
worth that now.
it is what's sort of depressing about this movie, like as we're dealing with like this constant question of like, is society collapsing? And you watch a movie about ancient Rome, this like famous societal collapse, and you're just like, we kind of keep making a lot of the same mistakes.
I mean,
as much as this was the most like fucking enlightened civilization up until that point in time, and they completely fucking did themselves in, and it feels like we're similarly like overthinking ourselves.
They had 500
into
years
a hole.
before it all fell apart, though. Don't
No,
worry.
no, we've had a couple good centuries.
Exactly.
Yeah,
But we based our system of government on
Yeah.
the Senate. I mean,
Oops.
yep.
uh-oh.
Whoopsie.
What? Yeah. Who is the Joe Manchin of ancient Rome?
Like just devaluation of people, like
Yeah, I mean, I don't think
make this movie today about Starbucks employees walking out. If you made this film today,
and I have to go. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
You're gonna come with me?
I gotta go too.
Okay, cool.
Laurence Olivier playing Howard Schultz,
He'd probably be good at that.
he would.
The portrayal of politicians too. It's like they're just always been sleazy.
I know.
And like,
It's so funny anytime they refer to themselves as the Senate in this movie. And you're
I am
like,
the Senate.
And even Gracchus, the Charles Lawton character, who's like the better one, is still kind of. I mean, he's kind
No,
of
he's
bad.
a corrupt.
You know? He wants to kill Spartacus too. You know?
Yeah, no one is pro Spartacus. It's
Right,
just how
right.
anti-Spartacus everyone
Right.
is. I
But
guess.
even you saying how funny it is every time this movie will cut to these like old board treaders hamming it up
Yeah.
in this room, deciding the fates of all these like crazy epic people on a battlefield and whatever. And you're like, yeah, it is insane. We just let a bunch of old guys go into a big room
And just figure
wearing
this.
suits
Yeah.
and ties and just decide everything.
Yeah.
What the
Yeah.
fuck are you talking
well, they're
about?
not wearing suits and ties in this movie. They're wearing
I'm
nice
comparing.
robes. Yeah, but maybe if we put them in robes, things would be better.
Yeah, that'd be better.
Yeah,
If Chuck
right?
Grassley
They'd
was
feel a
wearing
little
fucking
looser.
robe.
They'd feel a little.
Yeah, air it
Yeah.
out. That's the
I mean,
problem. These
it's
guys are just
fucking
getting clammy.
It's hot down there.
Yeah.
So, they make this movie at a certain point. Apparently, Edward Lewis, who's like the guy standing in on this for the script, right? Like he's lending his name. He starts to feel uncomfortable about it, and he says, "I don't want to be, I don't want to use my name for this." And Kubrick apparently at one point was like, "Look, I hate the script, but if you want to put my name on it, like, why don't we just do that?" And and Kirk Douglas is like, "No, I'm actually gonna, break tradition and bring Dalton Trumbo's name into the foreground." But like, I guess there's the suggestion of maybe he was like, "Fuck you, Stan."
Right.
Like, I'm not gonna do that. No, I guess we'll just
Right. And the fact that this movie was a hit and that most famously John F. Kennedy went to see it
exactly
when he was in office
It
was
flips
seen
the whole
as
thing
like
around. It's like enough of this.
that
shit.
broke
Right.
the picket. Like this movie
Right.
single-handedly essentially breaks the blacklist by putting Dalton Trumbo's name on it and having it be such a hit. They were just like, oh, we can't lord power over these people anymore. It doesn't matter. They're not afraid anymore. There's no onus on this.
Kubrick, these are contemporary. Contemporary press complained about how he hates directing. There are thousands of decisions that have to be made. If you don't make them yourself and you're not on the same wavelength as everyone else, it's very painful, which this was. And he says, shooting a movie is the worst milieu for creative work ever devised by man. It is noisy and physical. It's difficult to concentrate. You have to do it 5 days a week, 10 hours a day. It's not an environment an artist would ever choose to work in. I mean, these are all fair points.
It makes
Like, you go off to paint a picture, you're like, I'm going into my room for weeks. Don't talk to me. Like,
Right.
I'm going to slowly paint a picture. Right. And instead, this is like, hey, Stanley, do you want like the yellow flowers or the red flowers? Like every 5 minutes, right?
It makes sense that he spent so much more time in his life designing movies that he would never make than making movies. Not because like, oh, he couldn't get these things made, but probably because for him, it was like almost as fun to plan everything out without having to deal with the day-to-day logistics of doing it. And I mean, the longer his life goes on, there's a larger gap in between movies.
Yes.
Progressively as
right. He's deeper and deeper into his armchair, and he's like, okay, every time he has to really pull himself out.
Yeah.
How does he talk about his movies? I know how he feels about this one, but like was he fond in reflection
He says they're
on
mid. No, I don't know. Was he?
I think the other thing is, as time goes on, he talks less and less publicly.
Right. But I mean, like, there's the famous thing where he was like, right before he died, he was like, I think Eyes Wide Shut's the best thing I've ever made. Like, I do feel like he was always striving for like some perfect creative process, right? And Eyes Wide Shut, where he's just like, we're going to do this thing for years.
Right.
And we'll do as many takes as I want.
It was like
and no one's
Synecdoche, New
fucking with
York.
me.
Right.
Right. Like, it's right. It's like Synecdoche.
But also, those stories start to become secondhand. Stanley told me in the editing room that he thought this was the best movie he ever made. Like, we're still in the days in which JJ is able to pull up tons of quotes from him.
Right, and it's probably going to get harder and harder. That's true. Right, because it's not like for Full Metal Jacket, he probably wasn't like sitting down with Premiere Magazine or whatever. Like, there's probably less of that.
Yes.
It's funny, yeah. Arliss
Can
Howard.
you imagine Collider Frosty asking Stanley Kubrick his favorite karaoke song?
And who do you think's going to be in Phase 4 of the MCU? Like,
would you ever direct Fantastic Four? That's going to be the next Feige.
I hear Feige's going for it.
He's going big.
Stanley Kubrick sitting in a director's chair as like someone from Nintendo Power Magazine interviews him, just like,
yeah, I mean,
Stanley Kubrick to make Splatoon.
This I love, and I loved it, and I feel like we will get a lot of these, which is quotes from actors who worked with him later, right? Arliss Howard, who is in Full Metal Jacket and is my boyfriend.
Is your boyfriend?
I love Arliss Howard, the great Arliss Howard.
Inexplicably British in the Lost World.
Yes. Said when he did Spartacus, Stanley Kubrick said he was astonished at how many people were allowed to have opinions on the content of the movie, which is like a hilariously naive thing for him to say in one way, and also like totally sums up Stanley Kubrick. He's like, Arliss, you wouldn't believe it. All these guys had some sort of opinion on what Spartacus should look like.
Well, he was like talking about like studio notes, and his attitude was almost, I expect them to tell me to make the movie differently. I'm not going to listen to them, but I expect them to say that. To tell me what the movie should be about, how fucking dare they?
Right. But Tony Curtis says they never shoved him around. Like, he got what he wanted. He wouldn't shoot a scene if he didn't think he had enough, right? Like if he's like, I needed 20 extras for this and he gave me 10, like we're not shooting it. Like,
it's in that Arliss Howard quote. And not only that, but Tunker said like he'd come back the next day and ask for more.
Yes, he'd
be like, I want 100 extras. They'd give him 5, and he's like, now I want 200 extras, fuckers. Is it in that same Arliss Howard quote where he tells the story about seeing a rep screening of Spartacus where the marquee said Stanley Kubrick Spartacus? And he took a picture and sent it to Kubrick, and Kubrick was really touched because he felt like, aside from the fact that he...
This is actually Gregory Novitz, not Stanley Kubrick. Sorry, Arliss Howard, but you're right, yes.
Yeah.
He went to see the restoration, and Stanley was like, well, go see it. I'm not going to go, but
I'm not crazy about it. I have regrets. Right,
and it said, he took the picture of the marquee, and he loved that because Kirk Douglas thought of it as his film. So he did ask for a photo of it. So he has some sentiment.
Even in the 80s, he was sort of like, that movie is viewed as Douglas's victory rather than my film.
Right.
Not even the movie isn't as good as I thought it would be, but people don't even think of it. I mean, when I've been running down what you said, David, the conversation of people going like, Stanley Kubrick, what is that, 87 movies? And I'll list the 13 for them. And they're like, he made Spartacus?
Oh, it's weird. I mean, it's really weird.
Right. You have 3 early movies that people haven't heard of.
Right.
But outside of that, every other movie is pretty famous for being a Kubrick movie, and this movie's legacy is not that much on Kubrick.
No, not at all. I mean, it's so... I mean, there are interesting things in it, but it's so conventional. I mean, because it was for hire and it was supposed to,
It is
had to be,
conventional.
but like
It's a movie you could hurt yourself trying to find the Kubrick in.
and I think the morals of it are pretty straightforward. Where his movies after this get much more complicated on that front, and but you see these little touches of personality, and signature in there. But weirdly, I think they're in ways that are like positive. Like he'll pause on like a little kid, like his grandma, like squirting him with the goat's milk, or this kind of charming scenes between Gracchus and Ustinov, where they're just kind of like, you like women, like they're just kind of bonding, and you're like, there's a softer side to it. But those are the moments when I kind of feel like, there's a personality behind the camera.
Well, JJ, our beloved researcher, had a little editorialization in the dossier, which I appreciate. And he was tweeting something similar this week. And unsurprisingly, JJ spends a lot of time doing research for this show.
Yeah.
And then he'll go on his Twitter account and he'll tweet errant thoughts about whatever he's deep into in the research.
Sure.
And it seems like for the first time now, Twitter bros coming at him because they're like Kubrick heads are the most annoying legion of people of any of the directors he's had to sort of research for us in the last year and a half. And they're coming out of the woodwork. People don't even follow him, whatever. But he was sort of talking about JJ's own interpretation of the Kubrick process versus how it's often talked about. And he wrote this, I thought, very well in the dossier, but the notion of his obsessive takes, the legendary sort of always doing 100 takes of every fucking thing, and that the perception of it was he has this perfect thing in his mind and he's relentless and he won't move on until he sees the thing exactly how I envisioned it. And JJ's like, when you read people who worked with him, it sounded so much more that the thing he was waiting for was for something to surprise him. It wasn't that he wanted to see what was in his head. He wanted to see something that he could never come up with.
Right.
And it goes back to the fact that he starts out as a documentary filmmaker, as a photojournalist, that he was capturing real life, that he was able to find these organic sort of lucky moments. All of those sequences, when you see sort of like the life of the rebellion, them sort of traveling together, the things, these stolen moments.
Yeah, a lot of children that you're like, I thought this was all going to just be men,
all the stuff with the children is pretty fascinating because it feels like docudrama. It feels
like a refugee crisis that he's filmed. Yeah.
Right. And they're very sort of well observed, but very slight, underplayed moments of humanity that feel very organic. And they harken back to that as sort of his, his starting point.
Gotta be real.
Oh boy, was it me saying that bullshit?
No, don't worry. It's never a video. It's just a photo.
Okay.
I like when they laugh together. I especially like seeing Kirk Douglas laugh.
Go on, because he doesn't seem like a big laugher in general.
Not at all, and also just because it's like a period piece. I mean, I haven't seen really truly any of the epics, the classic epics, but you made me think of Humanity. I mean, like that was like a moment that stuck out to me. There's like, I think the egg on the face moment.
Yeah.
And then I think the two of them laugh together when they're reunited because she was able to run away.
Oh yeah, that's a good scene.
That stuff feels like it really stands out.
But
and
Kirk
unique.
Douglas also looks like a fucking cigar store wood carving, right?
Yeah.
And like he barely talks for the first half of this movie. Like I think I really clocked at like an hour 20 minutes is the first time he has an extended dialogue scene.
Yeah.
Up until that point, it's pretty much monosyllabic, or he'll have
Growling.
one isolated line at the end of a big scene. Yeah. And he's just kind of standing there with gritted teeth, stoic, where anytime he is emotive, it is bizarre. Like it does sort of strike you. There's sort of a Garbo laughs thing going on, especially when he's in this patina of the epic and playing the sort of square-jawed hero. He's like a Hall of Presidents robot. It's odd when he starts doing anything out of character. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean that when he laughs in that scene, you're like, wait, what?
Right.
Like, was this? I don't think they meant to leave this in. Like this was like between takes or something.
It feels like Jackie Chan bloopers.
I mean, that is why I love
yeah.
the scene I already mentioned with Herbert Lom too, because it's like allowing him to be retrospective or introspective, right? Where he's like, you guys are going to lose. Like, there's 6 legions massing outside, and Spartacus doesn't have any bravado. He just like is like calm, and he's like, I don't know. Like, and they like look out together, and he has that whole thing where he's like, death for a slave is like good in a way. It's like you're free of pain. Like, you know, it's not like that's later, I think, where he says that to Olivier, maybe.
Well, yeah, and not to jump ahead, but it's what's interesting about the whole end chunk with Tony Curtis of the like, what's the better outcome here?
Right.
Is it me stabbing you so you don't have to go up on the cross?
Right. Or
is it you
stabbing me, but
so
then
that,
you have to. Right. Yeah. No, it's a sad ending.
Right.
I mean,
because
they
we're
really
fucked either way.
lose.
What's the way you want to die?
Yeah, like they didn't Hollywoodize the ending at all. I mean, I guess maybe inventing Gene Simmons' character, but like
that is just her showing him his son, but like that's it, and even that is
pretty fucking
sad.
And who the fuck knows where they're gonna go? You know, like it's not there's like the
Malibu.
whatever is yeah.
Because I mean, like Gladiator at least sort of lets him go to heaven.
Right.
Yes.
You know, it gets all sort of like
and in Gladiator,
we go back to the wheat field.
Right. He suffers the immense tragedy at the start of Gladiator, so it's like he's like dead. Like his wife and children are dead. He's like, I might as well be dead, and then he's like building himself back up from there. But he doesn't want to be.
This is what I'm saying about like, and it just speaks to me probably being like a conventional sap or whatever. But Gladiator, a film I've never fully connected with. Watching this for the first time, I understand the value of like the amount of emotional endpoints that Ridley Scott was able to create in the setup of that movie.
Yeah. I love Gladiator. I think it's great.
I gave you my steelbook.
You sure did.
I got some.
I want to watch it again now.
I want to watch it again after that.
Fucking rules. And it, like much like this movie, as Ridley Scott recognized about this movie, is like loaded up with supporting actors who are like just thespian gems. You know, like that's what Gladiator.
Because they would all go
Richard
drinking in
Harris.
Malta or whatever.
Yes,
right.
And that's where Oliver Reed fucking finally
didn't he like
himself in.
keel over in a pub or something?
Yes, he should have.
Right.
That's how Oliver Reed was supposed to go out. On some fucking movie, and he's just like, I think I'll have a 16th, and the guy's like, all right, and he's like, well,
that'll do it. And,
it was also one of those things where they were like, you can hire Oliver Reed as long as you have someone by his side at all times, making sure he does not have a single drink.
Right.
And 2 weeks in, they were just like, what are we gonna fucking do?
And they were like,
what do you
2 weeks in, they
expect?
were like, well, he's dead, but we can make a CGI version of him that kind of works.
It's also wild that it works better than most.
It does. They spent a fortune on it, but
like when you consider that
in Gladiator, an actor died, an old guy died, and they turned it.
It's the same year as the fucking Sopranos thing.
Yeah, I mean, the Sopranos thing was peanuts, price wise compared.
Absolutely, but still, it's like you watching Gladiator. It's hard to find
you don't know where it is, right? Yeah, it's hard to notice the CGI. It's true. It's cool.
It's cool.
Just so the thing you mentioned is true. They get out of the Douglas deal essentially because he wants that. I want to make Lolita. Douglas is like, I don't want to do that.
And also, Douglas is like, he's an annoying little shit.
That's the thing. This is the quote, and I do like it. You don't have to be a nice person. This is Kirk Douglas. You don't have to be a nice person to be extremely talented. You can be a shit and be talented. And conversely, you can be a nice guy and not have any talent. Stanley Kubrick is a talented shit. So that's his assessment of him.
Is the quote in there the Kubrick quote about head versus heart, where he's sort of talking about the notion that people in Hollywood don't care and that everyone's a hack just looking for a paycheck?
Yes. The reason Hollywood movies are often so bad isn't because the people who make them are cynical money hacks. Most of them are doing the very best they can. They really want to make good films. The trouble is with their heads, not their hearts.
That's an incredible quote because...
brutal.
There's a surprising generosity in him saying like, no, it's really hard to make movies. People think this is like a careless business and the people are like cynical about it, but really everyone's trying their hardest.
Yeah.
And then the Kubrick punch comes at the end where he's like, just most people aren't smart.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I was thinking about that weirdly when I was watching Where the Crawdads Sing.
Oh, sure.
Where you're like, okay, so this book that's
you weren't watching, you were hearing. You sat your ass down and listened to the Crawdads sing.
That's right. Yes, I was experiencing the Crawdads.
And by the way, where is it? Did you find out?
North Carolina.
Okay, I've been trying to find them.
It's around the corner from that one swamp, you know.
Right, the second star, straight out till morning.
Right, and like that book, like was written by a crazy person. It seems,
but currently involved in her own murder mystery, a real life murder
mystery. But I've read snippets of it. There's like style, and you go. I went to see the movie. It was the premiere at MoMA.
Did they give you the coloring books?
Oh no!
They've been doing screenings of this movie.
I saw that,
and then people are walking out, and the studio is handing out adult coloring books.
Oh God, yeah. Well, we didn't get those, but like, it has this pedigree. It's one of the best-selling novels of all time.
Yeah.
they had filmed in Louisiana. It's not like fake. It's like real bayou kind of thing. And you're watching it and you're like, and the director spoke beforehand for like 25 minutes, reading like a thank you list, whatever.
It sounds incredible.
And it's just like, so kind of like that. It's like everyone went into this with the well-intentioned. Yeah. They really wanted to make it as good as it could be, but it's just not smartly made.
Yeah.
It's just, and it's like that there is absolutely, all the component parts can be there, except if the people who wrote it and directed it don't get it, you know? And it's crazy to like see what a director like Kubrick can do when brought in to help a studio thing get finished. You know, like, it's a real testament to that sort of auteurist kind of
talking about. I mean, look, a lot of it's taste and judgment, right? Which kind of can't be taught.
Yeah.
But you talk about the Kubrickian standards and the quest for perfection and control and all that sort of shit. And once again, you want to compare him to someone like Wes Anderson, who is certainly one of the most controlled directors working today. And once again, all the actors who work with him are like, yeah, it's difficult. He's like very precise.
Yeah.
The timing is like, there's no room for error. He wants word perfect. It's to the millimeter, all this sort of shit. It's very meticulous work. Everyone who works for him likes him as a guy. But I read some interview once with him that was very telling, where he said when he watches Bottle Rocket, he cannot get over the things that he looks at where he caved to the pressure of, Wes, we really need to move on.
Right.
Where he's like, it drives me crazy anytime I look at anything in that movie where it's off by like 1 degree or whatever it is.
Right.
And he just said, after he made that movie, he said, I am just never going to have anything I regret because I didn't take the time for it in one of my movies ever again. And he's like, I won't sleep if that's what it takes. If I need to work all night to figure out the way to do it, whatever it is, I'm never moving on because someone says we're out of time or money. And I think there's that sort of thing with Kubrick where it's just like, it's so much more painful to have to watch the movie later and constantly be haunted by the things you surrender.
Might as well get it right now.
You might as well get it right in the moment when you can.
Well, Kirk Douglas disagrees because he said at the time, Stanley will be a fine director someday if he falls on his face just once. It might teach him how to compromise. So Kirk thinks the opposite. He thinks Stanley needs to be on his face. Don't think Stanley ever learned how to compromise.
No, arguably.
Which is probably one reason he's so distinctive.
His biggest failure was the one that came out after he died. Like, if he had to make a movie after Eyes Wide Shut, that would have been the first time that he was really reacting to like a backlash.
Possibly.
At
Because
a
when he
large
died,
scale.
he was signed on to do Wild Hogs. Is that right?
He was. And he was going to do it with Haley Joel Osment.
Right.
And
Well, at first, he wanted to do it with 4 robots. He spent years
four
developing.
Hogbots. Let's call them what they were.
Robo-Hogs.
He had drawings filling his London flat of Hogbots.
Some blankie tweeted at me this week that the bar that they constructed for Wild Hogs, which was not a real bar, still stands today
We could visit.
as a tourist attraction. They built a bar in the middle of the
Specifically,
desert.
see the bar where.
Yeah.
Jeez.
It's the Wild Hog. It's like Hobbiton.
This film premiered at the Pantages Theater. John F. Kennedy attended. President of the United States.
Cross the picket line. That
He
was
sure
the
did.
fucking thing. It was like,
It won 4 Oscars, supporting actor, cinematography, costumes, and production design. It was nominated for score. Incredible Alex North score on this movie.
the score is unbelievable.
This like really good mix of like truly melancholy, like proper, like emotional score
Yeah,
that's still big.
The
like
romance
a big
scene
epic
is
score.
pretty incredible in
There's
this.
brass all over it.
There
There's
is. It's a brassy
tubas,
movie.
French horns, and trumpets just blasting your
There
ass.
should one of the Roman legions should have tubas and stuff. Do you think? Like, it's all the spearmen like charging in, but then one of them is just a
You're
big
right.
brass
There
band.
was no human like dartboard with an instrument walking around with the troops.
Yeah. There were some boys playing instruments in the bathhouse, but that was it in terms of.
Well,
That would be good, though,
Trumbo
if-
was trying
Right,
to play
right.
trumpet in the bathtub.
We haven't really talked about like that. This movie is pretty homoerotic throughout.
I know. It's
Yeah, Richard.
so
And yeah,
homoerotic.
David, don't get to the premiere of the
Yeah.
fucking movie. Let's back up the train and talk
And like the
about.
Tony Curtis of it all,
We
like
got
he,
Dickie Lawson here.
but he, Tony Curtis for years was this kind of gay icon, not gay himself, though there were always rumors. And
would almost like lay it on too thick about how much he loved women.
exactly, maybe it was
sure.
to
Maybe
protest
there
too
was
much,
a protest too much.
Yeah.
element to it.
But was like pretty crass about.
Yeah. Oh yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. And in this movie, he's
also married 6 times,
Right.
which is a fair amount of times to be married.
Yeah.
Sure. Go ahead.
he was in his mid-30s in this, because I had always thought, he was new on the scene.
Right,
I
you
didn't
think
really
this
use
is
him
like
as-
his
working for
second or
10
third
plus
movie.
years.
and he still
Yeah,
looks,
yeah.
cherubic or
But this
whatever.
being the year after Some Like It Hot is pretty wild. It's
Yeah.
hard to process.
But you would kind of think that, in 1960, we're out of Hays Code barely, or no?
It's dying.
It's dying, right?
But I would say the case code doesn't technically end until Bonnie and Clyde.
But
time,
even
like
so,
68.
you have-
Yeah,
you
it's
have-
going away.
Right.
The bath scene is like
The bath scene,
astounding.
There are other scenes where men are sort of intimately professing love to one another, and they're
Yeah.
they're always called I like a father, like a son,
Right.
But it's come on, And I'm just the bath scene though is almost explicit about the fact that this guy's bisexual.
You cannot believe
And-
how little it is coded.
And yes, it's villainy, and it's the old thing of it's Scar from The Lion King
Sure.
or whatever. But I didn't mind it because it's fascinating, and it's it's done in such an interesting
It's not.
snails and oysters.
And,
It's just
Olivier's also not camping it up
That's what-
any
it's-
more than he usually does. He's
Right,
not putting
right.
additional.
It
No,
doesn't
he's not
feel
twirling his
cartoony.
ruby
Yes,
ring and
exactly
adjusting his wig,
drooling or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
It would be funny if he adjusted his wig. Actually, maybe could have done that.
Yeah.
ironically, Ustinov is Prince John in the animated Robin Hood.
Well, of course, and that's
It's sort of what
that's
all of this becomes.
exactly who
Right.
The simpering
because
villain,
Ustinov in
yeah.
the beginning
Yeah.
where he has the boy carrying the umbrella and he's
Yes.
like the sun's that way and he's
Right.
kind of bitchy, and then that character sort of changes.
That's
but
the thing.
that's in the first scene of the movie, and you're like, oh, this is gay from right from the outset.
Yes.
When no one involved was gay as far as I know. In the major parts of the film. And I just think it's funny to have heard about this movie mostly through Clueless, but also just joked about in community for years about, that movie's so gay. And then to watch it, I thought people were exaggerating. And it's
Yeah.
oh, no, they were not at all.
I mean, there's a reason that it's the fucking joke in Airplane, and that the joke still
Do you
works
like
so
Gladi-
well.
Gladiators, yeah.
You're like,
movies
that's
about
it's
gladiators.
it's arguably,
Billy, have you ever been to a Turkish prison?
Yeah.
but it's one of those things where you're like, that's kind of the best
Way
gay
to put
joke
it.
in a straight comedy ever. That also
yeah.
doesn't feel
It's
offensive.
a
Right,
very
right.
funny euphemism.
Yeah.
Is what I
Right.
mean,
and when 300 came out and made so much fucking money, I remember there being trend pieces where they're just underserved gay audience. This isn't being talked about that loudly.
Right.
And Zack Snyder was sort of going around trumpeting we amped up the Lena Headey character from the book because we wanted this movie to relate to women, because these movies only usually relate to men, and we think that's why the film's overperforming. And it was no, it's overperforming because of gay men.
Right. It's abs. Yeah. And it's just really funny to think about, 9 years before Stonewall, gay guys in West Hollywood or the Village being like, have you seen Spartacus?
Right.
It's
This
great.
was
It's fun.
legal. This
Yeah.
was
Yeah, they're they kind of did it. Larry Olivier is,
You imagine there must have been screenings of this movie that felt like the fucking story of Sweetback's Badass Song, where the Black
Right.
Panther Party shows up to the screening and is just fucking finally.
right, exactly.
In San
Yeah.
Francisco, this movie must have just played
because
the end of Endgame.
it was not made. It was not made.
Every scene was
Right.
fucking Cap
All the
catching the
bats,
hammer.
right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
At
Like,
least,
I don't think it was made with this intention, but you can, if you pivot a little bit to one side, view this movie as camp.
Yes.
It allows for that in a way. I don't think it's a campy movie per se, but it has that ability to
And
appear
there's
that way.
something about the weird balance of Kubrick being so literal minded and straight faced about everything, and then having all these old theatrical actors who have the clout to do whatever the fuck they want.
Well, because every old British theatrical actor from the mid-century was a raging queen, even if he was straight.
yes,
This is and also but it's that
all them
so
fucked
there's-
each other.
But that's the thing. There's
Yeah.
that class of actor, the Olivier types, where you're
Right.
right, he's either gay or whatever, right?
Right.
Right.
And then there's I want it James Dean, Monty Clift, Rock Hudson, who
Yeah.
actually, of course, was gay. Marlon Brando, Burt Lancaster, Cary Grant.
Yeah, Spencer
all
Tracy.
those guys, where it's they were either gay, bisexual, or the Tony Curtis thing where you're like, there's no evidence, but I don't know. Like, there were always whispers becomes the story about this. Like those 50s leading men who were so pretty and so adept at comedy.
Yes.
And so whatever, like it's a swinging time in post-war Hollywood.
Look, these things are all cyclical.
Yeah.
It did feel like that was the first wave of like, or perhaps second wave, but like true fluidity in Hollywood. And it was sort of like, don't ask, don't tell. But it was like a lot of these people, you go like, wait, so was like the Katharine Hepburn, Spencer Tracy thing, was that a sham? Was that like a fake for press? And you're like, no, they very much did have a thing, even though he was married to a different woman. And he also, by all accounts, had sex with a lot of men.
Right.
And all these people were sort of like, why do we need to define anything? Everyone fuck everyone.
Yeah, James Dean and Sal Mineo were probably doing something on Rebel or Giant or whatever.
Right. But it just felt like kind of everyone was fucking everyone for 20 years.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think what's such a bummer about that is that like obviously there were pains of the closet and all that stuff, and but people had community and they were living fullish lives,
Right.
And then you get one thing about that, which is that goddamn Ryan Murphy show, which he decides to depict it as this like descent into the House of Horrors when one of the characters goes to one of these Noel Coward dinner party things or whatever.
Is that what that show is like?
There is one episode that's
Hollywood?
all Hollywood.
Yes,
There's an episode that's all at a dinner party at Jim Parsons is playing some nightmare agent or something,
right?
And it's just this like absolute haunted house, like full of like miserable old queens, and it's like, sure, I'm sure that was there to some extent, but also like it wasn't all that, I'm sure.
Well, also, look, I'll just say, some blankies understandably got upset with what they viewed as a flippancy with how we talked about bisexuality in the Cabaret episode, which I think was. To defend ourselves quickly, our interpretation of that specific character and not extrapolations about a larger spectrum of sexuality.
We didn't need to be so glib or whatever.
Right. We didn't mean to be glib. We were sort of talking offhandedly about these things. But when you dig into, especially this era of those actors, there are things like Charles Laughton was married for decades to his death, not through his death.
After his death, you were married.
Elsa Lancaster, who was the Bride of Frankenstein, the titular Bride of Frankenstein. A fascinating fucking couple, right? And there's the story that she walked in on him having sex with a man one time. And so then people for a long time framed it as like, oh, he was a closeted gay man. And it's like, no, there are people like Rock Hudson who by all accounts seem to be a gay man who was closeted and had to keep up
struggling
the
with that. Yes, and it informs his performances in this
he's
crazy
a big character
way.
on that,
right. You read about fucking Lancaster and Laughton, and it's like, no, they were in love with each other and they were married and they had like a sex life.
Right. Right.
These guys and gals in this era were very like boundaryless in these things.
I also think
this movie feels weirdly reflective of that.
I agree. There is a sort of energy to the movie that is speaking a lot to what was going on down the street from where they were filming.
But also you can, not even quote sneak it by, but you can just present it to a mainstream audience at the time and it won't really register with them. They'll be like, I don't know, it's Rome, sure.
Right.
Yeah.
People took baths.
It's the material,
right,
too.
Like, I'm not going to even think, like there's this sort of plainly homoerotic material that can both be easily interpreted and also just sail over heads enough at the time, I guess, because it's whatever.
Because like this was like a movie that would get adapted into a comic book that would be sold to kids.
Right, this is the biggest hit of the year, right?
Right, this was like a movie you would take your child to.
And fucking Christian can go show it to, Cher and Clueless,
right.
And she can be like, when are we going to fuck? And he can be like watching Tony Curtis with his hands in his chin.
Yeah.
I mean, his chin in his hands, and like.
Well, I mean, in that way, this is a true 4-quadrant. There's something for almost everybody.
Right.
Which is
Tony.
Rare.
He sings songs to the children. He's,
and I juggle as well. I wish I had the exact line. I juggle as well.
I can find the.
He did a Flintstones episode, right?
Did he? You think I'm going to have that information at my absolute fingertips?
I was just always fascinated.
That's going to take a couple Google.
I feel like Flintstones would play.
Well, there was
nightly.
just that Washington Post article about the Tony Curtis's Flintstones. It's big news.
Yeah.
The oral history that.
He did a Flintstones episode playing a character called Stony Curtis.
Thank you. First off, I just remember His face.
One of those things that when we're kids, we're watching that, and you're like, I know this is a reference to
David,
something.
this is why I'm bringing it up.
Right.
First off, his
like
face.
how Peter Lorre's in,
Yes.
Looney Tunes.
His face in that episode is so bizarre and does not match the Hanna-Barbera art style. And you're just like, this has to be a real person because they wouldn't design someone
Right,
to look
why would
that
he
way.
look like this?
Right.
And this drawing is so weird. What does the real guy look like? And then you look at the real guy and it's exactly the same as
You're
the
like,
drawing.
oh, they nailed it.
They literally, it's like a masterwork.
But they did like Anne Margrock. I think there was a Rock Hudson. I just remember Simpsons would play like Simpsons. Flintstones would play in like the Simpsons syndication slot on early Cartoon Network at like 5 p.m. every single day, back-to-back episodes. And I'd watch them. They have these episodes that were treated like Alec Baldwin and Kim Basinger showing up in Springfield.
Right.
Where I'd be like, what the fuck is going on here? And of all of them, Tony Curtis was the one as a child where I was like, what's this voice? What's this face?
Right.
What's this energy? What's this fucking persona?
What is being parodied? I don't understand. Like,
he
this
doesn't
isn't
fit
a
in
type
here.
that I understand.
He doesn't fit into ancient Greece.
No. He does,
now I
though.
really want to hear him say yabba dabba doo.
I bet he did.
Let me see if there's a YouTube
He mocked
clip.
Fred Flintstone for not getting enough pussy. He pedaled by in his footmobile.
Hey,
Fuck you, Fred.
God, the Flintstones is so weird.
Like, look at the other thing. Every
Yeah,
other
that's the
guy in
thing.
this, their head is shaped like an ice cube.
And they have
and
a
has
nose
4
like
lines.
this, like if it goes out like 2
It's-
inches.
remember-
Tony
do
Curtis
you
has
remember
like
the,
long curling eyelashes.
do you remember the Flintstones push pops?
Yeah,
And it's
Richard.
like they didn't have to change the shape of
Yes.
the characters to fit like a popsicle.
No, they all
shit
were
at all.
shaped like a push pop.
Did not see us going to Tony Curtis's
Flintstones.
Flintstones guest spot.
Yeah, well,
Not objecting. To be
I'm
clear,
going
not
to do a
objecting.
Flintstones rewatch podcast called The Podstones or some shit. The Flint Pots.
Before we wrap to the premiere, which I must discuss, of course, in the
Yeah.
box office game, is there anything else we want to discuss? We haven't really talked about Gene Simmons' character, Verena, but she's not the most interesting character. Again, probably Kubrick thought this way of
Yeah.
like not much, fairly saintly.
He wanted John Moreau to do it, which would have been fascinating.
That would have been pretty cool. That's like a year. This is like a year after Jules Jim or whatever. Like, right? Like this is
I
like.
think it was a visa thing. I was
Sure.
I saw that somewhere. That
No,
that
this
was
is like years. This is 2 years before Jules Jim. So she's really Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Would have been fascinating.
Sure.
There are a couple scenes here that are pretty striking. I mean, that first scene where they push her into his
that scene
chamber
is very arresting.
and
where
the
he won't-
silent sort of
attack
right.
her, essentially.
And then the reveal of like they're watching above like a grate. Like this is all. You
their
almost don't
attention,
understand why, because when Ustinov is sort of giving them all like the opening ceremonial introductory welcome to being my slave, here's how things work here kind of thing, he's like, and if you behave well, we let you have sex with people.
right.
So then you're wondering why he's being rewarded that quickly, and you realize it's all part of this weird fucking game of like, oh no, we want to watch you fuck this person. This is still for our titillation. This is still dehumanization.
Yeah.
Especially because neither of them have really talked that much in the movie at that point.
No.
They don't really have an extended conversation until they meet up again.
And even then, I mean, they get to "I love you" pretty quick.
Yeah.
But like whatever.
They do.
She's
They all-
pregnant
yeah.
like immediately.
Yeah.
But there, those great little kind of scenes that where they hold hands sort of or brush fingers, and that's this big moment for both of them. And then she gets sent off to be with the Spaniard, which that felt like Gladiator, as punishment. And then the next day he kind of mouths like, "Did they hurt you?" Like those are small, intimate moments that you wouldn't necessarily expect in a 62-year-old
No.
epic like this.
No, I also think she's incredibly good in the big scene with Olivier where he's like, I'll fucking kill your son if you don't sleep with me. And she's like, why do you want me to hate you so much?
Right.
He's like, no, I want you to love me. And she's like, so you're going to threaten to kill my son? You think
yeah.
you can force me into liking me through intimidation?
Well, it's a good way because he has won by all
Yes.
accounts in that movie. He
He
stole her,
crushes-
he
Right.
killed everybody else.
Yep.
And yet it's a good scene where she's just like kind of reminding him like, "Oh no, like you didn't win this. Like I'm or me at least."
Well,
you
but,
know?
but also he didn't win, right? Because like he thinks, right, I'm now on top, and the whole point of having Caesar in the background, played by very, very pretty John Gavin, is like it's like no, this is a guy who people actually like and
Right.
will like. Like this is a person who actually will have a cult of personality, like will actually command people through charisma, which is what Spartacus
It's
does
the whole thing
too.
with this movie. It's
Yeah.
why it needs to be someone like Kirk Douglas playing Spartacus,
Right.
because the thing that completely enrages them is that people like this guy.
Yeah, that's why they don't understand how he keeps.
It's like the juice that's giving this rebellion some real momentum is that like people, they find him appealing, They want to listen to what he has to say.
Yeah, and Crassus, the real guy, would go off to his death trying to basically do
Win
what
big
Caesar did in
victories.
Gaul, but
Right,
but in the East, and because he was like, I have to keep up with this guy, and then he got 30,000 of his people killed,
He's
including
like
himself.
this weird sort of like Dick Cheney, fucking
Sure.
Steve Bannon figure, where it's like I can see the whole game, and the problem is that
But
no one likes me.
I'm horrible.
I'm
Right, yeah.
boring,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
unappealing.
Yeah.
And Olivier is good at that in that he is, of course, an incredibly magnetic actor, and you love to watch him talk. But he can play like the most unlikable, like sort of slimy guy as well,
Yeah.
like without losing any of that charisma.
Yeah, and
So
it
good.
it also helps there, like that he's not doing like Starscream level villain camp.
Be funny if he was.
too.
Yeah,
sort of.
if it's too much, it's too much, and I think that I like that.
Starscream was a Roman senator.
He
I mean,
was.
that was a thing.
Oh no, famously, yeah. But like, there are moments even in this movie where you're like, oh wait, is he that bad? And then you're like,
sure.
oh no, he is. But
is.
he's not playing it that way.
Right.
And I think-
Oh no, he is. I just got confused because he like seems like an intelligent person. Like that's what it is.
He's
It's like-
pretty measured.
Because
Right.
the guy screws up and basically lets Gracchus nominate him to take the half the garrison
Yeah,
to
yeah.
and then that's and Crassus knows like, oh, that was a
mistake.
strategic an error strategically.
And someone like Lawton
And-
in his final moments is like,
Yeah.
I should do one good thing. Like
Right.
Olivier kind of never makes the human choice.
But like when in that scene where he's kind of berating the younger guy for making that error,
Mhm.
he then softens and is like, "Oh, it's okay. Like you'll be fine. Whatever." And you're like, "Oh, is he a villain?" But of course he is. It's a good performance.
Remember when that guy's gonna get like, was it 400 miles? There's like a 400
Oh, yeah,
mile
yeah,
ring
yeah,
around
yeah.
him. That's the punishment. No
Yeah.
one can give you food.
Yeah. So where does he go?
I don't fucking know.
Yeah.
Apparently, this film took 2 years to make.
Wow.
Jeez.
People were asking that earlier. It's a long time.
a production or just incompletion.
It's one of those things where it's
post-production?
like Variety calls it. It took 2. So my guess is
Sure.
it's like production and post, right? Like it's like the
But
whole
they might have
thing.
filmed this for a year.
It got good reviews, although Bosley Crowther, that old grump in the
That old
Times,
so-and-so.
hated it. Which I guess is maybe the best sign of like how this is not seen as an upper crust movie or whatever. It's even though it's a hit. Bosley in the Times is sort of like, yes, very good, like, very fancy, but even though it's got lots of fervor and historical stuff, like he's not that impressed.
I wasn't making this as like an offhand reference.
Heroic humbug is what he calls it.
It was the thing I saw on the Wikipedia that this had a Dell Comics color adaptation, which was kind of like the video game tie-in of its era. In the same way that the Marvel movies are like, adults go see them. But like, let's be honest, these are movies meant for kids. But Dell Comics,
right.
it was like, it's interesting to see what films got that framing at the time, because some of them are things like The Searchers, where you're like, it's weird that movie was meant for kids.
Yeah.
And other ones are movies that have completely fallen by the wayside, where you're like, oh, these are just little boy fighting movies.
But they almost went out of business when they did the one for Lolita. That was a misstep.
You mean this Peter Sellers movie isn't for kids? I don't. Okay. As we may know, some of this movie was cut down, right? Including the oysters and snails stuff, and that was objected to initially by the National Legion of Decency. When the film was restored, the dialogue was missing. Tony Curtis re-recorded the dialogue, even though he was in his 60s for his part. Olivier was dead. Fuck, what do we do?
damn it.
Anthony Hopkins impersonated him.
Really?
Because Anthony Hopkins does a perfect Olivier.
I will say, watching this, I realized, and I did not know that fact.
That it was done.
I was like, oh, Olivier was in the Hopkins phase of his career.
Yeah.
Like Olivier playing this role is very much like 90s
Because how many years
2000
away was he from
Hopkins.
like Marathon Man?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. You end up at Jazz Singer Marathon Man, which is like Hopkins doing Red 2.
Right.
Or whatever. But this is like, right, oh, you hire Olivier to just lend the gravitas and be your second
he
build
does.
guy and whatever.
So wait, the bath scene was not in the original theatrical release.
yes.
Okay. When was it put back
that makes
in?
it's not surprising.
1991. was
So
the
like
restoration.
really no one had laid eyes on that for 30 years.
It's a big fucking chunk of the movie missing and of character motivation.
There's also some of the bloodiest stuff had been cut out.
How
and,
did they
like, was
explain where Antonius came from?
Yeah, why he left that job.
I don't know. Or maybe just been specific stuff that was cut out. I don't know.
My old boss used to ride my ass. That's all he said.
And the big re-release,
Literally.
it was one of those things.
Good.
It was one of those things where Kubrick was like, "Look, I'm not interested in it being re-released," and Spielberg knew him then,
Yeah.
and was like, "Well, they're the American Cinematheque or whoever wants to do this." And he sort of talks him into it, and Kubrick eventually then does the thing he always was doing in the 90s, which was sending lots of faxes.
Yeah.
You ever remember, like Spielberg talks about it a lot, right? Like Kubrick was always sending faxes,
Yeah.
like from his estate in London. So that was how he supervised
this
the
thing
restoration.
looks incredible. This was notoriously like there was this important.
There's a very bad Blu-ray of it.
Yeah,
right?
it was historically the worst Blu-ray transfer. They were like, "What the fuck is Universal doing? This looks like a VHS put on a disc."
Right, and now
And
the
then-
4K. I have this deal.
Right.
Yeah.
It's now the proper, I think, 8K scan
Yes.
of
Correct.
the restoration
Of
work
the
that was
91
done.
restoration. Correct.
And it
yes.
looks unbelievable.
It looks wonderful.
You just like cannot believe the level of detail in this image.
100%.
You see like every pore in everyone's face.
I feel like its lasting reputation is as a good movie that is right. I mean, would you agree with me? Like that is not a masterpiece, but is a good movie and is not nearly one of Kubrick's better films, but is a good movie, right? Like it's still well regarded.
The 4K Steelbook, weirdly, when the movie ended, and this movie doesn't really have end credits, but then there's like restoration credits on the end of it. Another thing, like, look, it's embarrassing we've been doing the show for so long. It's taken us this long to get to movies from the 50s and 60s, which hopefully will start moving even further back. But this and Sweet Charity close together, it's nice to just watch two movies that have fucking entr'actes and intermissions.
Oh, yeah.
And all that sort of shit.
What's an entr'act?
It's like the overture, but when you're coming back from intermission.
Oh,
sure.
So you're
Play
walking back in. You've got your Cracker Jacks. You got your nachos.
I just love
The
that
thing you
whole-
immediately fast forward through when you're at home.
That's exactly
Next
right.
chapter, please.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which, Ben, by the way, Saul Bass, a big thing he spearheaded was like before him, opening credits would often just be projected on the closed curtains because they'd be like, this is before the actual movie, anything actually happens or matters. And he was like, this is like, could be a part of the film. You could make this storytelling. And it was like, when Saul Bass started designing opening credit sequences, they would open the curtains up. But a lot of that where there's just the overture playing, it was like and you're looking at a blank screen or you're looking at just a color with no detail or whatever, it's because they literally weren't opening the curtains yet. It was just sort of like place setting music. There's the fucking end credits they add on to this just for the restoration. And then weirdly, I don't think I've seen this before. The 4K disc just started playing special features.
Yes, it just it literally I let it run and then suddenly
It
Kirk
says,
Douglas was there being like,
and now
Kirk
special
Douglas.
features.
Yes.
So there's a very old, like 98-year-old,
Douglas,
2 decades
reminiscing.
post stroke Kirk Douglas, and he says this thing about like, I made 90 movies in my life.
Right. Yeah.
People will probably only, for the rest of time, remember at most 10 of them, and of those 10, Spartacus is the one that will probably last forever. And he's sort of saying it with a little bit of surprise, where he's even like, he knows that's neither the best movie he was ever in, nor one of his best performances. But this movie does have some weird cultural
It's true.
staying power.
And it's like, even when you're a little kid, you know about I'm Spartacus.
You know the
like,
image,
long
you know what
before
he looks
you-
like,
Yeah,
you know
yeah.
the shots, you know the lines. It just sort of has,
And it's certainly not his best.
Because it became the one of the chief things cited when people were talking about a Hollywood cliche. You know, the epics.
Right.
Spartacus, Ben-Hur, those two movies.
Yeah,
That's what
yeah.
gets referenced.
They
Maybe
become-
10 Commandments or whatever,
Those are like the three of this era and genre that
They represent like a major era of film, in America.
And so we could talk about, like, you can parody it and everyone understands what you're parodying, even if they haven't seen it.
100%. Yeah. And I think it's why when Gladiator came out and was obviously such a massive hit, and then there were attempts to do more.
And even Ridley tried to do
Kingdom
it
of Heaven,
2 more times. Exodus,
and none of them really stuck because I think the reason Gladiator did well, it was like, yes, yay, one fun throwback, and we don't need any
this
more
is
of
the
them.
We wanted
thing with all
one
these
of
things
them.
where it's like, well, you'll never make a successful pirate movie. It's like we can make the pirates movies. It's just that that won't be
It doesn't mean it's a trend.
a blank check for every studio to have a pirate movie or whatever.
Right.
Yes, right. You're right. I mean, I guess like after Gladiator, you got Troy, you got like movies that did well at the box office, but you didn't get any more good or well received.
And in a way, Troy was like, okay, Troy is the one that coasts off of the goodwill from Gladiator,
bit.
but people don't like it. And then when Kingdom of Heaven comes out, people are like, no, we're done.
Troy is the Pearl Harbor to
Armageddon.
Titanic.
Oh, sure.
No,
Yes.
that's fair.
You know,
Yes.
Yeah.
It's just like it's someone who's talented but not as talented and not as thoughtful, and
Right.
it's way worse.
And it was like, we're at one strike here. The audience
Yeah.
is going to
Troy's one of those
One-
movies that
bad version of this and we'll never go see it again.
I thought it was so bad when I saw it. I was
Same.
anti-Troy.
Yeah, I was like, this is
I thought
garbage.
it sucked.
Yeah.
And now I bet if I watched it, I'd be like, it's pretty good.
I think so too. I also feel like it's
You
one
know,
of those
big
movies
epic,
where there's like an
lot of-
hour cut back into it where people are like, oh, it makes sense.
Yeah, that's probably true.
There's, I mean, Kingdom of Heaven's the one where notoriously it goes
That-
from being like a disaster to a masterpiece
really
in
good
people's
one.
I
eyes.
have heard, I've heard that it's that director's cut is really good.
But I
Yes,
think like
it is.
Troy is at least a B plus in the director's cut.
Kingdom of Heaven's big problem, God bless him, is Orlando Bloom. Beyond, like
Also
you know,
in Troy.
well, he's
Fair
well
enough.
cast in Troy because he's
Yeah.
the
Little
dipshit in
puns,
that.
yeah.
Right. And Troy has the advantage of Pitt and Bana at least, where you're like, these are like very robust on-screen presences.
It was such a fascinating thing when Orlando Bloom's entire filmography was like a Black Hawk Down, 3 Lord of the Rings, Troy, and Pirates of the Caribbean.
Yeah.
And they were like, this guy's
He's
gold.
the biggest
right.
actor in
Right.
And it's like,
and now we're
no.
going to let him be the guy.
Right.
Kingdom of Heaven, here we go. And people were immediately
no.
just like,
Down.
no.
And Cameron Crowe was like, not this, Elizabethtown, huh? No,
Right,
no,
can we put
no,
him in modern day?
no,
And they're
no.
like, no, absolutely not. You're done forever.
Don't want it.
Yeah.
Now he's like slightly back. He's around now.
What's he
Orlando
doing?
Bloom.
Is he on the show, the Amazon show,
Which show?
the Lord of the Rings show?
No.
No.
He did the fucking, he did the weird carnival show.
Yes, like where it's
Carnival
like fairy
Row?
detectives or whatever
Was
with
him
Cara
and Cara
Delevingne.
Delevingne?
Carnival Row.
God,
That's it.
that's right.
That
Yeah.
was like a blacklist script that never got made. And then
And
they
it's
turned
one of
into a
those
quick-
shows
It was
that
Kubrick's idea first, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
it's
And
one of
then-
those shows that got a second season that we've still never seen, I think, because of COVID, and maybe
Oh,
we'll get
really?
it one day or whatever.
Yeah.
But that's the thing; he's around.
He's around.
He's around.
I feel like there's a lot of things though where you're like, oh, he was supposed to play the Dominic Cooper role in An Education, dropped out a week before filming started. There are like some of those where they're kind of interesting supporting parts and
Yeah.
good projects that he was signed up to do and dropped out at the last second.
Okay, Spartacus
Spartacus.
came out in late October 1960.
Okay.
Opens at number 3 at the box office, or I'm doing its first weekend at the box office, where
Okay.
it is a new entry essentially. But number 1 at the box office is the biggest hit of last year, the best
59.
picture winner of last year,
Wow.
one of the most financially successful films ever made, and we've talked about it a lot on this podcast,
We've talked about it a lot on this podcast.
on this very episode.
On this very, is it the 10 Commandments?
Nope, but
Ben-Hur?
Ben-Hur.
Okay.
In its 50th week,
Insane.
number 1.
That the movie where the wheel hits the other one, there's a spike on it.
Yeah.
Sick.
Pretty cool stuff.
There's other stuff too, right?
That's about it.
Okay.
Did you ever see the new Ben-Hur?
I did not. With what's his pants?
I kind of liked it.
Jack Houston.
Really?
I think I reviewed it and I was like, yeah, it's not bad.
Richard, I dare you to do a fucking
Revisiting.
reclamation project
I should.
on
I
the
should.
Jack Houston Houston
And Toby, what's his name?
Kebble.
Toby Kebbell.
Oh,
Yeah.
It's like two of those. The movie cast is weird because it's not
Two
like
of those guys who never quite
Yeah.
got
Yeah.
over the hump or whatever. Wasn't it also like Christian? There was like some
That's why
Christian
I liked
money
it.
there.
Well, they tried really hard to
or maybe that was it.
get
They
it
tried to get the
connect
Christian audience because
with
they're
the-
like, it's
I
Ben
know.
Hur, baby, and it was like,
That's another one of these things. You talk about this phenomenon, but Passion of the Christ, everyone's like, here we fucking go. And when they
Yeah.
did like the Nativity Story, anything like that,
No one wanted
didn't
it.
fucking work. Noah was the only other one that even I feel like crossed $100 million. And if people want to make the Christian movies now, they're like The War Room or like Fireproof, where it's like you make it for $1 million.
a little boy named Colton Burpo's trip to
You
heaven.
do Heaven is for real. Like, but don't do the epics.
No,
No
they don't
one
want
wants to see the epics.
No, they would if it was some fucking Australian psycho like beating someone
Right.
to death on camera. Like that was what they liked about it. They liked how violent it
I
was.
know, but they were just like easy, print money. We'll just
Yeah.
get people in the desert.
Virgin Mary, like girl from what was it, Whale Rider,
Rider.
right?
Yeah, none of those. Exodus didn't work.
The Rooney Mara smoking a cigarette on the crucifix.
Oh, yeah.
What was that called?
Mary
Mary
Magdalene?
Mary Magdalene. That
Yeah.
was
Right.
the guy from the Lion director did
Right.
that.
Yeah.
Garth.
And then it got delayed because of
Garth from
Weinstein.
Wayne's World.
And
Right.
What? Garth. Yeah, Party on Garth.
Okay.
Number 2 at the box office is a sort of sexy thriller. starring-
A noir? Not really.
I wouldn't call it a noir. I've never seen it. It's a Doris Day movie.
Huh? And it's sexy.
But it's like a thriller. It's
It's a
like she's being
serious Doris Day.
stalked by a
Okay.
creepy guy.
Huh? You've never seen it, but you know of it. You know the title.
I know the title. Yes.
Is it called The Stalker?
No. It is referring to a lacy dress that she wears.
Negligee?
No. That's no. Good guess.
It's a good title. Someone should make a movie called Negligee.
It's Doris Day,
Mhm.
Rex Harrison,
Okay.
and then Julius Caesar himself, John Gavin,
Huh.
and Myrna Loy, Roddy McDowell.
Good cast.
Solid cast.
Yeah. Who directed the thing?
David Miller,
Okay.
who is not a director I know particularly well. He did Lonely Are the Brave with Kirk Douglas, but
Which is a great fucking movie directed by Dalton Trumbo. Written by. Excuse me. Which
a bathtub joint.
Yeah,
Just-
it's a
just
bathtub
call it
joint.
a bathtub joint.
That movie's so good. Math
So
out, Jenna Rollins.
a guy.
Fucking rules.
I've never
Yeah.
seen Lonely Are the Brave.
You never have? Oh, you
No,
would
I've never fucking seen it. Okay,
love that.
why don't you nail me to the cross like Spartacus himself?
David, stay in the bathtub. Stay in the bathtub. Don't.
Yeah. And I'll hold,
Forky was like-
the boss baby up to you.
Forky was like, they're gonna crucify him, and I was like, yeah, the Romans kind of famous for doing that. There was
Yeah.
this one guy they got, kind of was a big deal.
It's pretty bad.
The movie's called Midnight Lace.
Oh, that's also a good
Pretty
title.
good title, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like if it was really good, I would know it well. Because
Sure.
a movie with Doris Day and Rex Harrison about a stalker called Midnight
Right.
Lace, like that sounds good.
Okay, you just reminded me. There is one thing from the movie I wanted to talk about.
Mm.
When everyone is saying "I am Spartacus," I would have been like backing out. Just
Yeah.
like,
You'd be like, I'm Ben for the record.
Right,
yeah,
right.
actually, hey guys, I'm gonna stick with my
Producer
name.
Ben Ducey.
Number 3, Spartacus.
They'd be like, Matt? Go on. Sorry.
Yeah, that's a good callback.
Callback. Thank you.
Patreon episode, I believe,
you.
if you guys want to know what that's about. Number 4 at the box office. 3 is Spartacus. 4 is it's a Western. It's a huge hit. I saw it when I was a kid. Probably haven't seen it in many years.
59.
The movie came out in 60.
Oh,
It
came out in 60.
out in October. It's just came out, in fact.
It's not Magnificent Seven, is it?
It
It is.
the
Okay, I was trying to think of
Magnificent
one that you would be shown as a child.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
I feel like that's an early
Just like
a
what's
starter Western for a
Yes,
kid,
absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
And then you get to know Eli Wallach and Neil Brenner and Steve McQueen,
Yeah, and
right?
like
and Charles Bronson.
one of the best themes in film history,
It is a
musically.
pretty good
So you
thing.
walk up to a movie theater. I mean, I know that these didn't really exist in the same way back then, and you're like,
Should-
"What?
there's not a
Should we go see
multiplex, right?
Ben Hur, Spartacus, the Magnificent?"
Right.
Like that's wild.
No, but the
I
reality
know.
is there's one theater
Yeah.
that has 4,000 seats that's
Right.
playing Spartacus. And if
Right.
you want to go see Magnificent
You
Seven,
gotta
it's on
go
the other side of town.
to
And
another
also,
borough.
but it's also like, I don't know, maybe not with Spartacus, but with some of these things, it's like you're not just going to see the Magnificent Seven, you're going to see like the news and
Yeah.
Daffy
Yeah.
Duck.
I
You're going
know.
to see like all kinds of great stuff.
I know, you get to see fucking Duck Amok or some
Yeah,
shit.
and like someone's walking around making pastrami sandwiches. Like I just imagine
And a
it's
beef
fucking
feature
paradise.
too. Tony Curtis would make you a pastrami sandwich.
Yeah, and talk about his dick with
Yeah.
you and
Yeah.
ask you about yours if you were interested.
And also the way pictures were shot.
Okay, but it was also hot. Because there
It
was
probably
no air
was
conditioning.
hot. There was a
So-
lot of fans going.
I mean, it's
guess.
like my favorite thing in Matinee, the Great Joe Dante movie, which we
Mm.
will hopefully someday cover. And Scorsese talks about this as well, but there was so much reverence for like a golden age of cinema, this and that. And it's like you'd go to it and it was like a fucking insane asylum. Children were like ripping up seat cushions and throwing jujubes at the screen and shit.
You know,
You'd sit there for 7 hours. People would show up halfway through a movie, not know
Yeah.
what happened, and then
I'm
wait
sure
for the
people
next
were
movie to
drinking like
start.
crazy
Yeah.
in secret.
Yeah, like anytime in like Mad Men they go see a movie and that's what they're doing. They're just
Right.
like they're going in between, sex sessions at the local
Right.
motel just to like drink a martini. And
Like,
they don't even care
That's
what's
right.
playing.
Look, Matinee's this movie about like the beauty of film going, and he's like, it was chaos. There was no reverence.
Right. It's not a cathedral where everyone is silent or whatever.
Right. This
yeah.
was like seen as like, it's a babysitting tool.
But like I remember that when I was a kid and my mom took me to the NFT, for
Mm-hmm.
example, like which is, some serious. It's now called the BFI.
Well, yeah, she had to buy a plane ticket just to take take you to a specific movie theater?
For a Bored Ape, the NFT.
If
And
I
I
were Seth Green, I'd be worried about that theater getting stolen.
I remember my mom just being like, "Look, I don't think you're gonna be annoying or anything, but like you got to be quiet. Like
Sure.
we got to be like you can't mess around
Right,
at this
this is
screening. Like
museum.
this is
Yeah.
people are gonna be kind of strict."
Yeah.
And she was like, "I don't even think they sell popcorn." And I was like, "What
Nope, they
are
don't.
you fucking talking
That was like my
about?"
mom taking me to film forum as a child and be like, no butter here.
Yeah,
It's
right.
like, what the fuck are you talking
yeah.
about? No
Yeah.
butter on the popcorn.
The
Brutal.
fifth film is a film we mentioned. It's a film that beat out Spartacus to a Best Picture nomination.
The Alamo?
It's The Alamo.
Wow. I mean, here's the other thing, Richard, you talking about like the embarrassment of riches of your options of movies to watch right now. The other difference is like the number one movie in America at this point has been playing for a year.
Right.
So it's not
Right.
like, oh, Ghostbusters and fucking Gremlins were released on the same day. That's wild.
Right, because they would just kind of relicense it, right? And like theaters would be like,
Right.
we're gonna play Ben-Hur for the next month,
Right.
even though it came out,
Right.
a
So
year
it's
ago.
just like
yeah.
the cream would rise to the top.
Yeah.
Because if something was shitty, it would be out of theaters pretty quickly. It wouldn't last or it wouldn't
Right.
get bookings nationwide.
And
Or
then
it
you would
gets
never
shunted
see it
over
again,
to, like-
basically.
right. So
So
you're like the top 5 can have a movie from a year ago, a movie from 6 months ago, a movie that came out this weekend,
Yeah.
a movie that's been playing for a month and is starting to rise.
Well, I mean, isn't it Why Gone with the Wind is still like the highest grossing movie ever because it was just like they just never stopped playing it, obviously. But also people were going again and again because it was like it's not like, oh, I'll see it when it's on television. They're
Right.
like, I might never be able to see this again. Like
Yeah,
in
and the
some
other crazy thing was
capacity.
like they'd play Gone with the Wind on television once every 10 years, and then it would
Right.
get like the ratings of the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
These things were just like
Yeah.
I mean, Star Wars was the same thing where kids would
Yeah.
be like, I saw it 30 times because I needed to remember it.
Because it wasn't, I couldn't just
I
go
never
home and watch
see
it
it again. I had
Yeah.
to commit it.
Well, Mike Ryan actually had that interesting point too, where it's like when people went to see Empire Strikes Back, which he remembers seeing. He was
Yeah.
writing about this
A
recently,
humble brag.
and it says episode 5 on it.
Yeah.
And like Star Wars, the original cut of it does not say
Right.
episode 4. And he was like, we didn't have the internet. We couldn't be like, what was
the
that?
fuck is
Did
that?
we miss 3 episodes
Yeah.
or was the last one 4?
Right.
And it's like, and then no one fucking told us. Like,
And
you
the
know, we
other
could
thing
just
is-
speculate.
The other
Like,
thing
Right.
is,
that's all we
if
had.
George
Right.
Lucas gave an interview and answered it, it would immediately get aggregated by
Right,
87,000
you might
websites.
read that, or
You'd be
and he was like, "We didn't know the answer to that until they re-released Star Wars the next year, and
Yes.
they had added Episode 4 onto it, and then it was like, oh, okay, so we're in the middle of a story, but like that's when they found out,
Right.
This is cool to think
But in their
about.
mind, are they like, is he going to make a middle 3
Right,
movies
like, what do
between
you
Star
mean
Wars and
Episode 5?
Empire?
It's just crazy to imagine them being like, figure it out,
Insane.
nerds. Yeah. Some other movies in the box office. A movie called Song Without End, which is a biopic about Franz Liszt.
That's thrilling.
starring Dirk Bogarde.
Oh, that's interesting.
A movie
I like
called a great title, Let No Man Write My Epitaph.
Oh, boy.
Starring Burl Ives and Shelley Winters.
That
and
sounds hammy.
Ricardo Montalban and Ella Fitzgerald.
Whew.
I
What's the
don't
plot of
know.
this film?
It's a crime drama about the son of an executed criminal who aspires to escape his crime-ridden neighborhood with the help of his mother. All right. Then you got a movie called, I love this title too, The Dark at the Top of the Stairs.
That's a great title. And that's
Delbert Mann picture.
isn't that a
It's a play.
play? Yeah, it's based
on a play.
yeah.
And then a movie called Surprise Package starring Yul Brynner and Mitzi Gaynor and
Okay.
Noel Coward.
Oh.
About an American gangster living on a Greek island and a deposed king, and they try to steal some jewels.
Wow.
Sounds pretty good, right?
Yeah, it sounds pretty fucking good.
I just like that when Yul Brynner's such a big star, where they're like, okay, so we need some movies for you. I guess could you play a king like
Right.
who like does a jewel robbery?
The thing you couldn't do is have like Yul Brenner play like a real estate lawyer.
Well, that's the thing. They never did
Right.
the Schwarzenegger thing where Schwarzenegger's like, I'm an average guy
Who is
with
pregnant.
a job. Right.
I'm stuck babysitting. There was.
that's
I feel like 10 years ago, this was like a trend of people photoshopping like golden age movie posters for modern films. and casting like who would have been starting the equivalent version
right.
of that.
Yeah.
And I always remember the Fast and the Furious one was Paul Newman playing the Paul Walker part and Yul Brynner as Vin Diesel.
Sure.
And I was like, that's a really good identification of Yul Brynner not feeling human.
Right.
Like,
Like this guy's
cast as
incredibly
something-
striking, but he can't just play anybody.
Right.
Yeah.
And then like when these epics go out of fashion, they're like, you want to play a killer robot cowboy? The only way we can contextualize you now is if you're a robot.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's your best bet.
He's so good in that movie. That's we're done with Spartacus.
Spartacus.
Yeah. The next episode's Lolita.
Uh-oh.
Blank Check will be canceled in 1 week. It's a joke.
Yeah. Look, I'm not looking forward to it.
I know. I should stop making jokes about how we're dreading the episode. It's okay though, because the episode is dropping on a very normal date, September 11th.
Oh no!
Sorry, Ben. Ben just gave me the look of why. Now I got to make some fucking note that you blew out the microphone. Yep.
I shifted away from the mic,
He
Ben.
did.
By
It's
the
true.
way,
I did this, but I don't think it was good enough.
no, I went sideways.
You should just say that it's the Lolita episode, but only talk about the movie "Remember Me" or whatever that movie's called. The the Robert Pattinson Secret
course.
9/11
Yeah.
movie.
That ends in 9/11.
Just talk about it. That should be the Lolita episode, so you don't actually have to deal with the movie.
Well, it'll be like Remember Me, where the twist at the end is it was Remember Me the whole time.
Or we look out
There
the
you go.
window and
Yeah.
we're like, it was Alita. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
More movies should end like that, where you watch the entire film and then the last 5 minutes they pan over to a camera that reveals it's September 11th, the calendar.
Someone just told me an insane twist in a movie. Do you know the John Cho movie with where it's
the
like
new
a road
one?
trip movie?
Yeah.
No,
Do you want to hear? Are you going to watch that movie?
Well, tell us
I
off
feel
mic.
like
Tell us
tell us
off
off
mic.
mic. Just
Okay.
on main feed, I feel like people.
Okay.
Yeah, I want to hear it.
I want to hear it too. I'm not going
Yeah.
to watch the movie. But take us out, Griffin. Unless there's anything else anyone wants to
Richard-
say about
Richard.
Spartacus.
No. I thank you for providing the opportunity for me to watch this. I probably never would have watched this
Same.
movie.
I never would have gotten around
You know,
to it. As
3 hours
embarrassing as
and
that is.
change, and
Yeah.
I
whatever.
think it's a good one.
But I think it's such an interesting. I'm so excited to listen to the rest of this season of you guys, because like I'm just really curious to hear like this is it. This is after this he's off on his own.
It's
thing.
the historic run.
And I think
Yeah,
that's
pretty much.
fascinating that
Yeah.
this was what it took.
Yeah. The cash, like the check never bounced after this. They never took the checkbook away from him.
Right.
He continued to just be like, here are my fucking terms.
And his only like real people didn't really know what to do with it was Barry Lyndon, right? Like everything
Yeah.
else really was connected.
But even still, it's like
Yeah.
that got a bunch of fucking Oscar
Right,
nominations.
right,
Something like
right.
The Shining, which a lot of critics dismiss, was a big ass hit. Like
Yeah.
he never had an outright, "What are you doing, Stanley?"
No,
until
huge
Eyes Wide
mess.
Shut, and he didn't live to see that.
Right.
Yeah. Richard, anything you want to plug?
Oh no, you can read reviews at VF. This is probably coming out. This is early September, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
yes, September 4th.
I will be in Venice, Italy, reviewing from the
Okay.
film festival, and then I'll be in Toronto.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
You gonna hang out with Julianne Moore?
Yeah,
president of
probably.
Venice
She's
Jury.
been
Oh, really?
texting me while we record. I'll get back to her
'Cause she
eventually.
keeps texting you more Bart Franklick scripts.
Yeah, well,
I
she
don't know
keeps
if I got his name right.
texting me
Like, don't
telling me she
text them to
juggles
me.
as well.
Text me PDFs.
And then you said, "Don't text me, lady," and she's like, "Don't call me, lady."
Anyway, arrivederci.
Welcome to the 11 Timers Club. Thank you all for listening. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe. Thank you to Marie Barty for our social media and helping produce the show. Thank you to AJ McKeon, Alex Barron for our editing, Pat Reynolds, Joe Bowen for our artwork, JJ Birch for our research. You can go to blankcheckpod.com for links to some real nerdy shit, including our Patreon, Blank Check special features. We're doing the Roger Moore Bond movies, but we're also going to do some fucking Kubrick tie-ins. We're shifting around the schedule a little bit in terms of doing some 3 commentaries back to back to back in order to time Kubrick things out. But the ones that we think we're doing are 2010.
Yes,
2010?
Which we'll do that in October, I think, and then Doctor Sleep in November.
Isn't there a third one? I'm forgetting.
I
what we're
think
doing.
for September we kind of want to do the Fletch movie.
Oh, yes. That's what we're going to do this month. I'm sorry.
Absolutely.
It's called Confess Fletch.
Yeah. So it's coming out later. So that will be the September 21st
Exactly.
episode. We're going to do Confess Fletch. Otherwise, you're going to get
The
Roger
Spy Who
Moore
Loved Me. I think
commentaries.
it's dropping today.
Great.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Probably the best one.
And the third one you were referencing, because we will do a third Kubrick on the Patreon But do we want to say it now, or do we want to save it as a surprise?
I'll say this.
It'll be when we're talking the walk.
We have a Kubrick themed talking the walk. That's all I'm gonna say.
That's for December of the week.
And I think it's a real corker of an idea. And as always, next week is Lolita. Good.